Good afternoon. Today is February 20th. Welcome to the bill hearings of the Ways and Means Committee. I would first ask that you please welcome Ms. Renee Harris, our new clerk for the session, an additional clerk, Ms. Harris. First calling House Bill 740, Delegate Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. In current statute, Frederick County's historic property tax credit is determined by the change in the property's assessed value. This property tax credit is granted against the county's imposed on its real property. Most improvement projects taking place on historic properties in Frederick County don't meet the existing requirements to receive the tax credit, despite the benefit they provide to the community. Not a single property owner has been able to use the tax credit since 2006, as its parameters are not aligned with the characteristics and needs of historic properties in the county. Following a rigorous stakeholder engagement process, the county executive's office recommended to the Frederick County delegation to introduce House Bill 740. This bill will take this tax credit out of state statute and instead give the county the authority to determine an appropriate tax credit for historic properties in the county. Rather than being based on assessed value, the county's proposed credit, which would be instituted at the county level should this bill pass, would be based on expenses related to restoration and preservation. This proposed county level tax credit is expected to be utilized as much as the current state statute tax credit. This legislation passed with bipartisan approval through the Frederick County delegation. We have Tori Venable here to help answer any questions that you might have from the county executive's office, and the Frederick County delegation would ask for a favorable committee report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 740, House Bill 521. Jackson Hicks.
Chair Atterbury and members of the committee, my name is Jackson Hicks, and I'm here on behalf of Delegate Todd Morgan to present to you House Bill 521. The purpose of this bill is to prohibit lobbyists working for the St. Mary's County government from making personal contributions to the campaigns of St. Mary's County commissioners and state representatives. Ensuring the ethical actions of those trusted to represent constituents is important. This bill will assure the citizens of St. Mary's County that their local and state elected officials are not bound to influence by outside interests. The St. Mary's County delegation supports House Bill 521 with 3 yay votes and 1 vote to abstain. We thank the committee for their time in considering this bill.
Okay, are there any questions? Madam Vice Chair.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to testify, Mr. Hicks. I just wanted to understand the origins and the genesis of this bill.
This bill was brought forward by a member of the St. Mary's County delegation and brought to a vote.
Yes, I understand that you're presenting on the members' behalf. I'm not sure whether the members were not available to testify.
Delegation Chair Todd Morgan, who I work for, is currently in E&T committee session. The governor is presenting a number of housing bills, which he felt was important to attend.
Okay, and then the other members in support were not available to attend?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. From your understanding, since I know you're not a member, so I don't want to question you too much, but from your understanding, what is the reason for this bill being brought to prohibit campaign contributions for a very specific county? It's just kind of a very unique bill, so that's why I'm asking that. Do you have any sense of the origins of this bill and why it's being brought?
Yeah, thank you. So to my knowledge, this bill was brought forward in response to a lobbyist being hired by the St. Mary's County government, and certain members in the county took issue with that and brought this bill forward.
Okay. And many of our jurisdictions do hire lobbyists. So it sounds like this bill is kind of targeting perhaps a decision of St. Mary's that some members may not agree with.
I wouldn't be able to comment on the
Okay, well,
opinions of other
if you
delegates.
can ask, well, thank you for presenting the bill, but if you can ask the actual members when they're available to please make sure that they follow with the committee, because we have a lot of questions about this very unique bill that has been brought. We appreciate that you are a wonderful staffer that's representing your member and did a great job. So thank you.
Oh, don't leave yet. Delegate Hartman has a question.
This will be an easy one.
All right.
Couldn't a member just turn down a contribution? I mean, is this really necessary?
Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, politicians are capable of saying, refusing donations, and this can be acted on without the need for legislation.
Kind of like drugs, just say no. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes the hearing on House Bill 521. House Bill 792. Is Delegate Jones here? Hello. Oh, okay. Come on up.
Yeah, come on up.
Delegate Jones, if you can just hold one moment, just recalling House Bill 521.
Yeah.
And Madam Vice Chair had some questions.
I apologize. I got a text message that our delegation chair sent his staff down to present a delegation bill. So I ran out of committee, and here I am. So I'll be happy to answer any questions about the bill.
Yes, we very much appreciate that you were summoned, because we do have questions.
Yeah, it kind of shocked me too. I wasn't really prepared for it as well, but I'm here now. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer questions about the bill, like what it is or what it is. A little bit, I'm out of breath. I need to learn how to jog a little bit more, I guess.
It's down steps, not up steps. What's going on here?
Well, thank you for joining us. The question I had was, this is a very unique bill. It sounds like, I took a look at it, and you're prohibiting campaign contributions for a lobbyist hired by St. Mary's County. It's very unique. So what is the genesis for this?
So the purpose of the bill is to stop the self-licking ice cream cone of lobbying. And let me explain that. So you have a county government that uses taxpayer funds to hire a lobbyist. For the lobbyist to go after more money, I guess, state funds. And then they turn around and donate to the same county officials that wrote their contract and hired them. I can't think of a more circular act of gratification than what's going on with county lobbying. And I tell you, St. Mary's County's never hired a lobbyist before. This would be the first one that we've ever hired. So this seems to be a popular bill with constituents, and I would ask for a favorable opinion of those. Now, I have heard some questions about the legality of this bill. And look, we already limit donations based on if you're a casino, it's not allowed to donate money. So look, there's other, this has been pushed forth in other places of the law to limit political donations.
We'll certainly take a very good look at it. Thank you for your time and coming down to the committee to present the bill. Thank you.
Delegate Hartman, did you want to ask good delegate your question?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was asking earlier, couldn't you just say no to the donations? Is this bill necessary?
I would think you could say no to the donations. And look, I don't want this to reflect at all on the lobbyist that they chose to hire. I think he's very competent and a good lobbyist. And if I had a personal business, I would consider hiring that same lobbyist. This is more of a bill dealing with principle. And look, I think this is a problem, just not a problem that could happen in St. Mary's County, but for all counties. If you look at it, I mean, there is a motive where you're having elected officials giving a contract to a lobbyist and then the lobbyist turning around and handing money back to the elected officials. To me, it's an obvious conflict of interest and an ethics problem. But look, we're all smart people in this room. We know how political donations are basically handed out by the lobbyists. It's not necessarily a check from them. It's a check from the people that they represent. So it wouldn't have any limitations on that.
I thought I was done.
Yeah.
The lobbyist is hired by other officials.
Yeah,
not-
with taxpayer money.
Correct. I understand.
That's a big if. We're not talking about a private company that hires a lobbyist and then all of a sudden the lobbyist goes out and gets some type of grant funding or another bill. We're talking about taxpayer money that's hired there. And look, I mean, I've described the situation twice. I think it's an
understand.
obvious problem.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my only question, my friend, is you mentioned, to my knowledge, the only other entity in the entirety of Maryland that is banned from contributing are casinos. And so I have a position, quite honestly, I think if the casinos challenge that ruling under Citizens United, they'd win a preliminary injunction in about 7 seconds. Because you can't ban people under Citizens United for making political contributions targeted to the content or who they are. And so, you know, I support, you know, what you're trying to do here, if that's what St. Mary's County wants to do. I just wanted to make clear, you know, for the record, I mean, do you think that, for example, the committee that you serve on governs a lot of healthcare entities and they are allowed to make, I won't say unlimited, but they're allowed to make as many contributions as what they want. So if we passed a bill in this committee with election law that said, for example, doctors can't make campaign contributions, that wouldn't be legal, right?
That's obviously illegal.
Right.
Now, if you wanted to pass a law in this committee that said that state funds from like University of Maryland medical system can't go to the people that actually appropriate them money, I would think that would be legal. You know, the Citizens United case is always blown out of proportion, but that did have to deal with federal law and had to deal with tax speaking up. It wasn't where people were directly hired and employed by the people that make the decision.
So that's my only final question. I might be confused. Is your bill seeking to prevent the lobbyist from giving money back to the people who hired him, meaning the county commissioner?
Yes. So the bill is, I don't know what the testimony was before I got here. The bill is very simple. It basically says if a lobbyist is hired by St. Mary's County, that said lobbyist cannot make donations, personally or business wise, to state or county officials.
So
That's
did
it.
the-
So it's only limiting the lobbyists that are directly employed by the county, which makes complete sense to me.
So so I get the county officials, so you're like, well, the county commissioners hired me, and then to keep in their good graces, in theory, I give them campaign contributions. The state officials, so the state delegation, did you guys have any input into selecting the lobbyist?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing, is there a question? Oh, Delegate Fair.
Sorry. Just quick clarity of
Thank you.
what you just said. It's good to see you. Thank you for running down here.
No problem.
You just commented that you want it to be in effect for the lobbyist that is representing the St. Mary's County Board of Commissioners, right?
Yes.
So if that lobbyist is a member of a firm, is that entire firm now barred from contributing to the county commissioners?
I don't have the legislation in front of me, but I would say yes.
Okay, so it's not just the individual lobbyist, but if the lobbyist is a
firm that
member of an
employs
entire
it.
firm.
And that would be the firm that the county actually hired.
Okay, so
So the bill's, like I said, very simple. If the county employs a person, a government affairs agent to lobby on their behalf, they can't accept political donations from said lobbyist or lobbying firm.
So I guess my only follow-up question is like, do you have any concern that an individual who works at a firm who has absolutely no association with the St. Mary's County commissioners, their First Amendment right to participating in the political process would be subverted by the bill? Or do you have any concern at all about
No,
that?
I have no concern at all
No,
because
okay.
we've already done this in several pieces of law, including, as we mentioned earlier, with the casinos.
Okay.
So there's, I'm not aware of any lobbying firm that's the size of MGM, but
Okay.
we still have that, exclusion in the law.
That's fair. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do appreciate you answering the questions. Thank you.
So just a point of clarification, the casinos cannot donate, but their lobbyists can donate to.
But again, the casinos make money privately. They're not funded publicly. And that's what this bill is really getting to. It's the public hiring of a lobbyist using public funds, and then that money coming back to the elected official. That's what we're trying to circumvent in this bill.
Okay,
So I appreciate it. And sorry about any interruptions getting down here.
no
So
worries. Thank you for showing up.
thank you, Madam
And
Chair.
that concludes the hearing on House Bill 521. Now Delegate Jones, House Bill 792. And I have a Nikki Tyree here, signed up to testify in favor. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. Hi, here you are. For the record, I am Delegate Dana Jones. Hello, Chairwoman Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I come before you today to reintroduce HB 792, Election Law, Campaign Finance, Draft Committees, and Exploratory Committees, which was heard in this committee last year. The cross-file of this bill has already passed the Senate unanimously. For too long, exploratory and draft campaign committees have been exempt from our accountability and disclosure laws. HB 792 would close this loophole. Maryland deserves to know who is financing prospective candidates for election. An exploratory committee is an entity established by a prospective candidate for public office to determine the potential candidate's viability. A draft committee is organized to encourage a potential candidate to run for office without approval by or in coordination with that individual. So there's a difference between the two. Current law fails to provide oversight for these entities. In 2022, the State Board of Elections, SBE, crafted regulations based on the Attorney General's opinion regarding the formation of exploratory committees. These didn't require compliance with basic campaign finance transparency laws. HB 792 requires that both types of committees report contributions to the SBE, bringing them into line with the rules others must already follow. This bill does not eliminate committees nor impose limits on donations. The bill would ensure that they would just follow disclosure laws, limit the purpose for which funds can be expended, and establish processes for dissolving them. The guardrails do not currently exist, so that is the reason for the bill. Exploratory and draft committees would be allowed to engage in the following types of expenditures. This is outlined in the bill, and I know that you all have already read it. Public opinion polls, direct mail, hiring staff, website hosting, digital communications, leasing but not purchasing office space, and purchasing electronic equipment. As outlined by the Attorney General in their favorable testimony, which can be found in your floor system, there is a distinct lack of explicit rules that exploratory and draft committees may operate under. HB 792 would remedy this issue. I respectfully urge a favorable report on HB 792, and I thank you.
Thank you. Whenever you're ready for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins. For the record, my name is Nikki Tyree, League of Women Voters of Maryland. As Delegate Jones has already said, this bill passed through the Senate without a problem, so we are asking for a favorable report in the House as well. The League is deeply concerned about the polarization that's happening, and the reality is that most voters are starting to express some apathy or straight out distrust in our democratic process. This bill would speak to the financial aspect of that distrust, allowing draft and exploratory committees to set up postage, essentially appear to be campaigns on behalf of candidates, and then not actually having to disclose the finances that are going into it only breeds more distrust. This is a super simple bill. It's not going to derail anybody's grand plans. So we ask for a favorable report.
Questions, Delegate Henson?
Madam Chair,
I want to make sure I understand the scope of the bill. Are you saying that now there are people who are expending funds for a particular candidate or cause, and that those people are not required to report what they're doing?
Yeah, so Delegate Henson, one of the greatest examples of that is Ready for Hillary. And basically they're allowed to collect funds on her behalf, and then they can send out mailers, ad time, and they just have to put a disclosure on it that it's that campaign. That's not the campaign, it's that thing. But there's no font requirement. There's no, amount of endorsement requirement. So it can be very, very small. And to the average voter, they aren't looking for the nuances between campaign and then somebody who just really likes Delegate Henson and wants her to become president, and they collect millions of dollars to do so.
So are you saying that if this bill were to pass, then a person would not be able to continue to do that?
They would still be able to continue to do that, but what this bill would do would make them fall in line with already current reporting, with a grain of salt, right? Essentially reporting requirements that the same campaigns have, with the same disclosure setup. And then beyond that, they wouldn't be able to just hoard the funds afterwards. There are certain procedures they have to meet once the campaign has concluded and how they disperse those funds.
What's the rationale behind not having a contribution limit?
Chairwoman, SB Administrator would like to come forward
Okay,
for information.
yep. State Director, Jared Emeritus, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. So the reason why you don't have contribution limits is basically there is no appearance of corruption with a draft committee because there is no candidate at this time to associate it with it. That's why we can put parameters around how you do the expenditures, and that it's then not able to circumvent the contribution rules later on, and that you can't prepay for anything for the campaign purposes. And then once the candidate announces, these draft committees have to end. So there is no, I guess, benefit to allow for unlimited, there is no harm in allowing unlimited contributions because we have basically put guardrails up to what they can spend it on and the timeline that they can spend it on because they can't continue on its campaign afterward.
So that's precisely my concern is embedded in that part of it. Let's say let's say you just wanted to be in opposition to someone who was running. And so you could have several draft committees of people who you wanted to run against that person. You have unlimited amounts of contributions that can be made and you can send out direct mail. So let's say I'm running for office and someone says, I really don't want her to win. They could then, in essence, set up, 5 different committees for a draft committee for someone to run against me and have an unlimited amount of funds to promote those someones that they could send out in direct mail.
So I think there's 2 different things here. One, these are draft committees or exploratory committees for a particular candidate to seek an office, right? I think the scenario that you're proposing is more of a super PAC or a PAC that's outside of it already. It's just like I can set that up today and make independent expenditures to support or oppose a candidate and take unlimited sums of money. So in your scenario, I can form, and report activities and take unlimited sums of money to oppose a candidate and move forward. This is to basically encourage a particular candidate either to run for office or in that, to draft them without their knowledge and saying that there's ground support for that candidate, or a particular prospective candidate looking at it and going, I want to see if I have the ability to win an election and explore these options. So this is a little bit different of a scenario rather than yours, which is just basically under current law, you can do your activities today.
What I'm trying to flesh out is the potential for abuse. I hear what you're saying in terms of how we would like it to work. And if everybody is playing fairly and above board and nobody's simply seeking to exploit the margins on this, that's how it would go. But in a scenario where we try to flesh out all potentialities for abuse, let's say a person is running and then the candidate is disconnected from this draft or exploratory committee. So let's say some person or persons really didn't want a particular candidate to win who had already announced and was campaigning. Are we saying that a person could then establish these exploratory committees with unlimited amounts of contributions and send out direct mail that were in support of whoever they were trying to draft or whatever that particular candidate was that wasn't connected? That's my concern. One, that it has the potential for big money to really influence politics. And two, if we get to an area where there are bad actors and they want to exploit it, that it really could make it difficult for an individual candidate. Because as an individual, you can't set up 5 committees with unlimited amounts of contributions to send out mail. You have your committee and you have your limitations. So that's my concern. Can you help me kind of walk through in the areas of where there could be potential abuse, how we get around and safeguard against that?
So the first part is, I'm gonna say about the abuse here, is about independent expenditures. So if an entity wants to make unlimited contributions or unlimited donations or expenditures on, supporting or opposing a candidate, that is current law.
But that's
There's
already
nothing that we
current
can
law.
do. And all we do is just make sure that it's disclosed in a timely manner, and it's disclosed within 48 hours after they make $10,000 or more of expenditures in support or defeat of a candidate. That's current. This, to prevent abuses with exploratory committees, is basically how we set up I would say, the parameters in which you can spend your money. Because we've defined what is permissible in the exploratory realm. So you cannot necessarily veer off of this and start making more campaign material, because then you're going to either become a PAC or you should be a candidate committee at that point there. This is limiting the focus of these activities to just exploratory activities.
Can you give me, I'm sorry, an example of what direct mail would look like in an exploratory fashion?
It would be like, do you know so-and-so? Do you know my name? But it would be like kind of like seeing, are these the issues that you are concerned about here? Understanding, I would say, your electability. Do you have a favorable opinion about so-and-so? The normal polls that you would I would say, look at to take and move forward on whether or not to engage to file a certificate of candidacy or not. The other part too is that there's a timeline on this. So the timeline ends when there's the certificate of candidacy deadline has approached. So right now, we take a look at this, for this example here, all exploratory actions will cease because the deadline was February 9th. So now we would be going through and going to all these exploratory or draft committees and saying, okay, you have to now close, your activities are done, because there is no more exploring options for this upcoming election. So you have to either close and get rid of your funds and file reports and disclose. So that in itself, I think, is very powerful, because it really talks about when this activity has to occur. So it's not going to be right up until election. And if they want to then engage in, because either the candidate didn't file or file, they have to then fold that operation, and then the candidate has to move into his or her authorized candidate committee and establish that at that point. And it's when they file too. So if they file early, that also affects the deadline. But these things do not go on in perpetuity.
Sure.
And I think this is important. Yeah.
Just to speak more directly, I think what your concern is a little bit outside the scope of this bill. Just because what people do with their committees isn't really directly addressed in this. But I would argue that your concern could be mitigated a little bit by having a robust campaign finance law around what they're doing. So kind of not quite different things, but a little bit.
If my concern is outside of the scope of the bill, then that makes me even more concerned. Because if we are saying that you can establish these committees, you can raise unlimited amounts of money and send direct mail, and we don't have any parameters on that direct mail, could you reference the district that you want this person to run for? Could you reference opponents or sitting officials in that district when you send out this direct mail? So I think the combination of unlimited amount of funds that can be raised, and to your point, not having specific guidelines in terms of what you can say when you send direct mail. I get we've delineated what you can do, but you can put on that direct mail things that, in my opinion, could be harmful to folks who don't have the deep pockets of unlimited fundraising as well. But I will check with you guys offline for any further questions. Thank
I
you.
appreciate your questions, and the need for guardrails, because there aren't any around either of these committees, is something that is the concern, and that's why the bill was brought forth. Because there isn't the guardrails now, and they are allowed to do all of these things. So I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Chairwoman?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the hearing on House Bill 792. Folks, let's welcome, as we call House Bill 826, Delegate Stewart. We have colleagues here from E&T, Delegate Long, Delegate Lehman, and Delegate Nowaki.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, illustrious members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm back. For the record, I'm Delegate Vaughn Stewart. This is House Bill 826. So House Bill 826 is about affordability, it's about blight, and it's about local autonomy. And it is the product of an interim's worth, or really an interim plus worth of work by a lot of our county jurisdictions trying to analyze what are the housing issues that are reverberating the most at the local and county level. And the bill essentially does three things. It's a bit of an omnibus bill. It's three separate things that are interrelated. One is it allows counties in Baltimore City, including Baltimore City, our 24 local jurisdictions, to create a tax on vacant properties that are unfit for human habitation. Second, it allows non-charter counties to regulate short-term rentals like Airbnbs, VRBOs. This is a power that our charter counties already have and have actually used in several cases, but our non-charter counties want that ability as well, and they don't have it. Finally, third and finally, the bill requires property owning LLCs. So not all LLCs, because LLCs run the gamut, but property owning LLCs to annually update their contact information with SDAT. Right now, the rule is that sometimes they have to put the resident agent's name and address. That's a very 20th century approach to this. There's no requirement for a phone number or an email address, and that's been a problem. So I'm just going to go one by one as quickly as I can of why we're doing each piece. So first, on the vacancy tax front, I don't know, I probably don't have to tell y'all, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, the cost that vacancies impose on communities. We're not just talking about the immediate costs of maintenance and of lost tax revenue and of a disinvestment and decline, but we're talking about broader societal costs of population loss, of crime. Just in the past year, we've seen a number of people injured by vacants that have collapsed on them. And just as some cursory research I did suggested that just in the last couple of years, at least 5 firefighters have lost their life in vacants. So this House of Delegates, this committee in the House passed a bill to allow a similar tax to be imposed in Baltimore City last session. The vote was 132-1. I don't think the one is a member of this committee, but the Senate did not. The Senate did not follow suit. So now we want. Of course, we want to get the Senate on board, but we want this to be an ability and a tax that all of our local jurisdictions can do, because here's the thing, vacancy taxes work. They not only work to create revenue that local jurisdictions can use for schools and roads, but they also work to reduce vacancies. One study suggested that on the low end, they can reduce vacancy rates by 13%. Now, if you'll look in your bill file, you'll see some, a couple unfavorable testimony, some favorable with amendments, some concerns that maybe this doesn't lay out a fair process for vacancy taxes, or that they're going to be imposed unfairly. I'm open to all those amendments. I think a lot of them are really thoughtful. I don't want this to be a tax imposed on properties that are like temporarily vacant for a short period of time. I want to make sure we're getting to the heart of the problem, which is blight and long-term vacancies and unsafe housing that is really doing no good for our local jurisdictions. So I'm open to those amendments. So secondly, we'll move to the short-term rental piece. Now, I'll just say this. I don't hate short-term rentals. I use Airbnbs quite a lot when I go travel. I think it's nice to be able to sort of be right in the heart of a residential community. This is not an anti-Airbnb bill by any stretch, but it is unfair that charter counties like my own can and have regulated at least some minimal restrictions or requirements or licensing regimes for these short-term rentals that are popping up across our state, and yet non-charter counties don't have that ability. And especially in places like the Shore and in beautiful mountain Maryland, where you got counties out there and over there that don't have charters. Well, those are the kinds of vacation spots that a lot of these places are popping up. We want to make sure that all of our counties have the ability to regulate them. If you look at my written testimony in your file, you will see that I cited 3 studies with footnotes, I might add, with footnotes, of examples of how more Airbnbs, more short-term rentals in a community can increase the overall price of housing. So that's something to consider as well. Finally, and this is really, to me, a no-brainer component. I think our SDAT annual registration requirements, like I said, are stuck in the middle part of the 20th century. You have to put a resident agent's name, but who knows? That guy could just be like Joe Schmo on the board. That could be the CEO. Who knows who the guy is, who the resident agent is? Sometimes that's not even updated for years and years and years, and there's no contact information for the guy. So in places like, Baltimore City, Western Maryland, sometimes you have these row houses, one after another that are vacant. And there are all these nonprofit organizations and local governments that want to do these new whole block redevelopments. In fact, E&T just went up to Baltimore to look at how this works. It's really cool. But one of the big barriers they face is they try to call the current owner because they're like, hey, bro, I've got an offer for you. Let's get this ball rolling and fix up this neighborhood. And there's no one to call. There's no phone number. They don't know who Joe Schmo is. They Google him and can't find any information. There's no email address. It's a preposterous way of doing business and to regulate this issue. You'll see some possible, some testimony in your file about how this is duplicative. Obviously, we don't want it to be duplicative. We don't want it to be onerous for property managers to do this, but we think that there's a way, maybe if I have to offer a sponsor amendment, I will, but there's got to be a way that we can bake this into the current SDAT process, just so there's someone to call or email. That's all we want. So in conclusion, Madam Chair and Vice Chair, thank you for your indulgence. This bill attempts to tackle a number of different problems that has been top of mind for our local jurisdictions, and I urge a favorable report.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, members of the committee. Chuck Cook with the Department of Housing and Community Development. As you probably know, it is Housing Day and in the Environment and Transportation Committee upstairs, so it is leaked down into Ways and Means today, so I apologize for that. But this is an incredibly important bill and one that we in the department support wholeheartedly. As you have probably heard or will hear, and you're going to hear this multiple times, we're facing a 96,000 unit housing shortage in the state of Maryland. That is our most conservative estimate. I have another bill later on where I'm going to mention that again in Ways and Means later. But the point of the matter is that we are facing a housing crisis, and we need every tool in the toolbox, including for our local government friends, to have that ability to take care of these problems. So here's some numbers for you. We have 200,000 vacant housing units across the state, roughly 15,000 in Baltimore City alone. Some of you may be familiar with our Strategic Demolition Fund or Project Core in the city of Baltimore, where we are asking for more money this year and the ability to use it to do debt financing in order to knock down more of these vacants. If these locals have the ability to also, on top of that, add a vacants tax, just like the delegate said, our sponsor, it has a duplicative effect. It's going to give us the ability to take down these vacants quicker. It's going to have the ability to redevelop these neighborhoods and bring them back up to their former glory, or at least redevelop in a way that is more productive. To the second point on Airbnb and VRBO, we are strongly supportive of that, just for the fact that these non-charter counties need this ability. Like the sponsor said, it shouldn't just be a bifurcated system where some can and some cannot. They need this ability, especially down on Lower Eastern Shore, where you have non-charter counties, but you have a lot of people that are renting out places in order to get to Ocean City and be able to fill in where hotels cannot currently. So we have a housing crisis that needs to be addressed. We need vacants that need to be taken down. We need the ability to regulate these Airbnbs and VRBOs, and the Housing and Community Development Department is 100% in support of this. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Baltimore County Executive Johnny Olszewski, also here as MACO President, and most importantly, esteemed prior member of this esteemed august body. This committee, in fact, too, absolutely. It's where I got my start. ditto to everything that's been said, Madam Chair. This really is about giving us local government leaders the tools to be able to be most effective in tackling the housing challenge and the vacant challenge. We appreciate our partnership with the sponsor and all of you for looking at this. We know that vacancy disincentives will give counties the ability to really address the significant costs that are being taken on our communities. Just in Baltimore County, we recently identified a definition and an inventory of these vacant properties. Having the differential rate will be very helpful for us. As I talk to my colleagues across local government, they share in that sentiment. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to be able to connect with corporate owners with up-to-date information so that we can take action. And then also the ability to go after short-term rentals such as Airbnbs. Obviously significant economic potential, but also the ability to destabilize local neighborhoods if left unchecked. So we appreciate the opportunity to be on the forefront of these challenges collectively. We want to again thank our sponsor and all of you for this bill and request a favorable report on House Bill 826. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Dom with Mako, an enthusiastic me too. This is probably the best housing bill you're ever going to see. I don't want to add anything else. I'm here for questions though. Thank you.
Just to identify myself, I'm Terry Hickey. I'm the Director of Housing Community Development in Baltimore County, where we have had a lot of experience recently in looking into the vacant issue from the standpoint of housing production. And when we looked at the idea of what to do with blight in the community and ways that we could turn these into productive homes, we realized we had a number of market rate solutions. The county exec alluded to the bill that was passed with a definition and the establishment of a registry. But we need bigger hammers in that toolbox for folks that really don't have good intentions with their properties. This does that exactly. And we continue to want to use these and other tools to turn these into functioning homes, both rental and home ownership. And I'm available for any technical questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of questions for this first panel. Delegate Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the bill sponsor. So I'm just going to cut to the chase. I'm looking at the letter for favorable with amendment from Baltimore City and specifically asking about just maybe kind of like a two-tier verification process, basically saying site as vacant and unfit for habitation and just kind of thinking that like that creates, you know, two hurdles you have to overcome. So curious if the sponsor would be interested in language that would just say cited as a vacant structure under the local building code.
Yes, the sponsor would be interested in that. I think that was a very thoughtful letter from the city. I'm open to that. Obviously, this bill is now the committee's jurisdiction. It's yours to tinker with. Baltimore City said we need to sort of streamline that definition a little bit more. You'll see some other folks on the other end of the spectrum that say we need to tighten that definition up a little bit. Ultimately, this committee has worked with much thornier problems before, and I trust that you'll do the right thing, but I'm open to whatever you come up with.
Thank you.
Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and definitely applaud your efforts here. So my concern is on part one of the bill, and this was alluded to earlier with the definitions. I have constituents who occupy homes that are probably borderline being condemned, or maybe aesthetically they've got significant issues. It's because they don't have the income to facilitate repairs or getting the home up to spec. Some of them are borderline condemned, should be condemned. So I noticed there were some ors there, whereas vacant or. So my concern is could someone use this to supplant that person out of that home or increase their taxes because they're already in a situation where they're struggling to afford staying in that home?
Well, no, I mean, the point of offering both vacant and unfit for human habitation is that we're not going to be kicking anyone out of homes that there are currently humans living in. And if we need to clean up any of the definitions or the words or technical aspects of the bill to make that clear, we're not trying to kick anybody out of their homes. What we're envisioning instead are completely empty properties that are allowed to essentially decay over a period of years, right, that are providing negative outcomes for the kinds of homeowners that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Yep.
Delegate Hartman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. So as far as the third component of the bill requiring a way to contact the owner, through SStat, there's a mailing address for tax bills and things of that nature. Why would you need a phone number or email address and not just the good old letter? I think the post office needs the 60 some cents.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I still, believe it or not, Delegate Hartman, do remember how to send a letter, but it's starting to sort of escape my mind a little bit on how to do it. The reason we did that is essentially the current system isn't working. The mailing addresses that are currently included in SStat are sometimes like the corporation's principal place of business. Sometimes it's some random address that's connected with the LLC that wannabe redevelopers don't even know how it's linked to the property. And so letters will be mailed. Sometimes they'll be sent back by the Postal Service because it was a sort of an error in the recipient. That property no longer is inhabited by anyone, for example. So in other words, we have a vacancy of the address that's been given to SStat. Or the number of letters will just be sent with no response whatsoever. And obviously that can happen in an email inbox as well, as a lot of people who have emailed me can attest. But providing more contact information can't possibly hurt a problem that right now is festering out of control.
Right. You addressed the second part. I was going to say, how hard is it to create an email address? If somebody, the purpose of that's anonymity, remaining anonymous. So if they wanted to simply create a separate email address that's never checked. So I don't know if it's the right answer to the problem, but I understand what you're trying to get at. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, certainly people can choose a dummy email address and not answer that too, but we just think that it can't possibly hurt to have an email address and a phone number.
Delegate Noarki from E&T.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, if I may have two questions. Thank you. Delegate, thank you for this bill. We've had many conversations about some of these issues. So my first question is going to be about the LLC requirement. We've talked a lot about mobile home communities in particular, and there's plenty of good actors inside of that space, but we know that there are some actors that are not good actors inside of that space. How do you see this affecting those in that space that, as we've talked about, might be creating offices and moving them around regularly and doing those kinds of things, like several that I have in my district? How could that address that potentially?
I think that it's going to hit it squarely. And in fact, actually, because of your feedback, Delegate Naraki, we've got a sponsor amendment to clean up some of the language to make sure this also applies to out-of-state LLCs that have to already submit SStat annual reports themselves as well. Because to your point, a lot of these folks in the mobile home space, but really a bunch of different sectors, they switch their state registration requirements all the time. It's kind of a race to the bottom sometimes in some of these other jurisdictions where they kind of outcompete each other to who can offer the least, who can require the least amount of information, as you know.
Yes.
And so we're hoping that this bill helps solve that problem, really on a number of different fronts, because not only is it helpful for property owning LLCs to provide contact information if people want to call them to buy it, but also to your point, if you've got residents in a mobile home and they've got terrible conditions or they've got problems with the property and the property manager is AWOL and they want to be able to call someone higher up in this sort of company, the shell sort of LLC that's supposedly owning everything, we want them to be able to have a ready number they can call and try to get the help they need.
Well, I appreciate that. My second question could either be for you, Delegate, or some of the panel there. So I recently, the vacant property issue is a big one for myself and in my district. Director Hickey and I recently actually did a whole tour of vacant properties in my district. So this is maybe more of a technical question for Baltimore County, but relating to the bill. Would there be means of escalation inside of the vacant tax, right? Because some of these properties are habitual. Some of the folks don't want to address them, don't want to do anything with them. And of course, we don't want to throw a hammer right away at folks, but there's some that you unfortunately do need a hammer for. I know the director can talk about several at Eastern Baltimore County that we've seen. So I'm just curious if there's sort of escalation measures there to maybe make folks be more compliant with some of these properties.
Yeah, the answer is yes. The counties would be empowered under the bill because the enabling legislation or the enabling provisions here are pretty broad. The counties would be able to, if they want to be relatively lax for a couple of years and then really bring the hammer down, as you said, counties would be empowered to do so.
And if I could, Delegate, just real quickly, and I appreciate you taking the time to show me the various properties, and they all fit into some of these different categories of challenge that require this. I've used the hammer metaphor, you've used the hammer metaphor, but I don't want folks to forget counties Baltimore County, I can speak to ours. We have grant programs and other incentives. So I'm not naive enough to think there aren't owners that are stuck underwater and scared to come forward because what might happen. They don't want these hammers, and we're out there trying to reach them and provide incentives to help fix up the property, or if need be, convey it to a group who can, to turn it into a worthwhile home for that neighborhood. And it's a win-win for everyone. So there's really two sides to this equation.
And if I may add further, we actually did amend our local laws on the code enforcement side to allow for escalating penalties on that side of the house. We've actually seen that has proven to be actually very successful. We obviously, as Director Hickey said, we want to try to work collaboratively and find solutions. And we also have supports and grants and carrots, but we also think having a stick or a hammer actually does help drive the conversation on a lot of these properties. So
Thank you.
Delegate Layman.
Thank you for the warm welcome. The second time we've been here in a week with you. Delegate Stewart, thank you for this bill. You're trying to address an important variety of challenges with housing. My two questions are, first of all, on the vacancy tax piece. So this is enabling, correct, allowing localities to address this by either regulation or ordinance. But could the sky be the limit in terms of what the local governments assess? There's no mention of a range of tax rates. What do we know about what that rate looks like elsewhere? I believe DC has a law like this. Did you look into that? And
yeah, I mean, we have. So we don't have an upper limit on the bill. I mean, if that's something that the two committees wanted to pursue, we're not necessarily opposed to it. We don't have an upper range limit. Ultimately, jurisdictions would be limited by the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the prohibition on unreasonable, penalties, basically unreasonable punishment. I believe DC, I believe, does have an escalating amount. I don't know the exact multiplier it has. I know that a number of other jurisdictions across the United States and even Canada have also applied a variety of differential rates. We just wanted, as you heard from the very, very thoughtful discussion from the two gentlemen from Baltimore County to my left and right up here, we just ultimately trust the counties to do the right thing. We know that they're already trying to solve these problems thoughtfully and collectively, and we were trying to, through the bill and a broad enabling grant of power, we're trying to give them the autonomy they need to solve the problems that are closest to home.
thank you. Thank you for that. And the second question is about the short-term rentals. So you use this language in the bill where you talk about high intensity use of short-term rentals. Is that a reference to the concentrations of these rentals? Is it about the length of time? I'm not familiar with Prince George's County. When I was on the county council, we passed this law in the county to address Airbnbs. But what do you mean by high intensity uses?
Yeah, thank you for that, Delegate Lehman. First of all, I also appreciate you and Delegate Naraki throwing me some softballs here from my home committee to make me look good. Nice to have some friendly faces in the crowd. We actually have a sponsor amendment for the committee's consideration on that high intensity piece. The initial impetus of it was to allow non-charter counties to really regulate it in areas where you have this proliferation of short-term rentals, not necessarily just in all parts of the counties, but talking to other stakeholders. It seems like they may have had a concern that it seems like maybe you share, which is that it's a little bit of a tricky definition to get a handle on. It may inject a little bit of unnecessary uncertainty into the equation. So I have a sponsor amendment actually remove that and allow the non-charter counties to regulate short-term rentals for any purpose. And again, the justification would just be to put the non-charter counties on the same level playing field as the charter counties, which currently can regulate these things in whatever areas they want to.
Thank you for that. And just for the record, Madam Chair, I did not know the answer to that. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions for this panel? Delegate Wims?
That's what I was just gonna say. You just answered my question. It was on the short term. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you all very much. Kevin Canali, are you testifying? Okay. Alice Kennedy. Justin Fiore. And then I do have one unfavorable. Is Jamie Gregory here? Okay, whenever you're ready.
There we go. Alice Kennedy, Housing Commissioner for the City of Baltimore, here on behalf of Mayor Scott and the City of Baltimore as well. Good afternoon to the chair, co-chair, and members of the committee. I'd like to just give some background on our testimony this afternoon. The Department of Housing Community Development actually created a dedicated investigator position in 2003 to assist housing inspectors with locating property owners that own vacant properties or have other property maintenance issues. And our investigators conduct over 5,000 investigators per year where information is readily available and an investigation request is never created because the housing inspector is able to easily look up the information and make contact with the person responsible for correcting a housing violation in our jurisdiction. In the more challenging cases, we rely on our investigators to dig through available data and locate valid contact information. And our investigators are trained to use different databases such as state and city databases like Judiciary Case Search, Maryland Foreclosure Registry, SDAT, and others. The investigators use their skill set in these databases to put together bits and pieces of information to locate valid contact information. It's very rare for one of our investigators to not be able to find a good contact information, but it takes a considerable amount of time. Many of these cases are what we refer to as single property LLCs, or where an investor purchases a low-end rental or vacant property under the LLC. So having the requirement that an LLC provide contact information and making that information available to our investigators would actually save us thousands of hours and allow us to resolve violations further, vacant violations further, but also to be able to support the short-term rental components as well and requirements under that. So we are in support of the bill and very much also in support of this component in terms of requiring the registry. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Jamie Gregory or Justin Fiore? Okay, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 826. Delegate Allen, House Bill 862. And is Dan Ellis here? Okay, no, he is signed up as favorable, but I don't see him here. So whenever you're ready, Delegate.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues and friends in the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Nick Allen. I'm here to testify in support of House Bill 862, which deals with disabled veterans property tax credit. It's cross-filed in the Senate with Senate Bill number 639, sponsored by my friend, Senator Ben Brooks. I'm sure you often hear the phrase that this is a really simple bill, but in this case, I swear it's true. 862 simply expands the current tax credit for permanently disabled veterans from those veterans rated as 100% disabled by the VA to 80% and above. To be clear, this is only for those veterans that are ruled to be permanently and significantly disabled as a result of their service. This also applies to surviving spouses as well. I know we all want to thank our veterans and honor their service. I'm sure there's not a single person here who doesn't agree with that. So we're going to skip that portion and I'm going to go on to the other aspects of this bill and why I think it's important. I'm aware of the concerns raised in the fiscal note for this bill, concerns by MACO and local jurisdictions, and basically for any bills dealing with property tax credit and tax credits in general. But I want to emphasize what the fiscal note and its assumptions kind of failed to capture. First, I think we tend to think of disabled veterans as an older, retired population, especially our Vietnam veterans, but this isn't always the case, and it's really not the case anymore. Most veterans, when they complete their service nowadays, are in their mid-40s at the absolute oldest. And after 20 years of fighting multiple wars, many of them leave the military with some sort of service-connected disability. So again, the expansion of this credit to those deemed 80% disabled is still expanding it to a relatively small population. But what's important to note here is that these are individuals who, should they choose to settle in Maryland and receive this tax credit, even though they will receive this credit, they will continue to live here and pay every other tax for decades to come. And this is something that I think the fiscal note fails to recognize and fails to capture. Second, I think it's a more fundamental issue that I want to mention is Maryland absolutely has to be more competitive when it comes to retaining our military and veteran populations. We have to be competitive with Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and especially Virginia. We have to offer competitive incentives and yes, tax credits to veterans in every responsible way that we can to make Maryland the home of choice for veterans and their families. We have to be competitive and we have to make Maryland the best place for veterans to live. Beyond thanking veterans for their service, which is, as we acknowledge, important, this really is the entire point behind pretty much every veteran-related bill that the governor has introduced in the last 2 years, and that's the point of this bill as well. So I want to thank you all for your time and consideration. I want to thank my cross-file in the Senate, Senator Brooks, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Michael Higgs, and I am the Director of the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation. House Bill 862 would allow veterans with at least an 80% service-connected disability to qualify for a property tax exemption. The property tax exemption for disabled veterans was established by the General Assembly in part to offset costs of medical bills, ongoing care, and management of disabilities for individuals who have served in the armed forces. Currently, the exemption is only available to veterans who have been deemed by the Veterans Administration as having a 100% service-connected disability. House Bill 862 would lower this threshold to 80%, allowing a larger pool of veterans who suffer from disabilities due to trauma or injury sustained in the line of duty to qualify for a property tax exemption. The department is committed to finding new ways to serve residents who are in need the most. And for many homeowners who served and suffered for their country, the cost of coming home is too high. This legislation is part of an ongoing effort to make sure that veterans trying to make a life for themselves and their families are not left behind. I'd like to thank Delegate Allen for sponsoring this legislation and look forward to answering any questions you guys might have.
Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. Mr. Canale, you're testifying.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in opposition to the bill. You have my written testimony. I want to be clear that we don't raise policy objections with this bill. We're here because of the fiscal note. I also want to be clear, this is not a credit, this is an exemption. We support a lot of local option property tax credits. Several counties have adopted local option property tax credits for veterans, but this bill has a $23 million fiscal note. And with the blueprint and with all these transportation cuts on the table, counties are not in a position to absorb those kind of costs. So we very respectfully ask for an unfavorable report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. And that concludes the hearing on House Bill 862. Delegate Feldmark, House Bill 775. Yep.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. For the record, I'm Delegate Jessica Feldmark here to present House Bill 775, and I am not here to ask for a favorable report, but rather favorable with amendment. And you all should have received the amendment this morning, but I wanted to just take a minute and walk through it. So this committee earlier in the session had a briefing on electronic ballot return, and this is an issue that we've been working on for a couple of years. I will admit, when I filed this bill, I did not have high hopes for it passing as filed, and understandably so. I don't think the bill as filed was the right solution based on all of the security concerns we heard at the briefing. However, I felt very strongly that we needed to continue the conversation about this issue. And that conversation has continued, and I'm pleased to report that we have a new approach to propose, and that's what the amendment outlines. I think this is really important because the reason I wanted to file the bill, even though I knew we couldn't go with it as filed, is because the status quo is just not acceptable, right? This committee has done tremendous work to promote mail-in ballots as a way of making voting easy and convenient for people to do on their own time, in their own home, fitting their own schedule. That ease and convenience of participating in our democracy should be something that voters with disabilities enjoy also. And so that's what this amendment really sets out to do. So as you know, we already have electronic ballot delivery. We already have the ability for voters to complete that ballot electronically. Currently, if someone receives their ballot electronically and completes it electronically, they then have to print it out and return that paper ballot to the Board of Elections. What we are proposing in this amendment is actually the physical return of an electronic ballot. So nothing gets returned electronically. The internet never touches our election system. There's no direct exposure. There's no electronic conveyance to the Board of Elections. What a voter with a print disability would be able to do is request as a reasonable accommodation that they receive from the Board of Elections a flash drive or other digital storage device. So that would be mailed to them with a pre-printed return envelope. So again, going back to the existing system, they can receive their ballot electronically, they can complete it electronically. And then instead of printing it out, they would be able to save it to the Board of Elections provided flash drive. Return that to the Board of Elections, again, through the full range of options. They'd have a pre-printed return envelope, they could drop it in the mail, they could take it to a drop box, they could drop it off at a polling place, they could take it directly to the Board of Elections. From there, once the Board of Elections received it, they would, on a computer that is appropriately air-gapped, not connected to the internet, not connected to our election system, not connected to any state networks, be able to open the ballot and the oath document, right? We're also providing that the oath that needs to be signed can be signed electronically and saved on that same device. That would be opened, printed, and from that point, once the Board of Elections has a printed ballot and a printed signed oath document, they can treat it just like it arrived in an envelope. Okay, so what we're doing is providing an opportunity for voters with print disabilities to be able to vote independently and privately. So for a number of voters, the flash drive is something that they would be able to manage and return on their own. If they still need assistance, at least the person assisting them with a flash drive can't see how they voted as they would if they were helping them with a paper ballot. Okay, so we've addressed security concerns. We're not suggesting any connection to the internet, any exposure to our election systems, right? And we're providing an independent, private means of voting for voters with disabilities. Now, that's the basic process. The amendment does specify the Board of Elections, of course, would have to adopt regulations to work out all the details on this. But I'm really optimistic that this is a solution that is viable and we can implement this and meet our goals of security and accessibility. We do not have to choose between them. We can have both. So with that, I'm going to again ask for your favorable with amendment report and look forward to questions and discussion.
Good
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Ronza Othman, and I am the president of the National Federation of the Blind of Maryland. NFB of Maryland is the state's oldest and largest organization of and for blind, low vision, and deaf-blind individuals. I'm also a voter, as are my members. My ballot is neither secret nor independent, and I've testified before this committee numerous times on why. The bottom line is that the current method of making people with disabilities who can't use paper ballots return a paper ballot is in fact discrimination. When I have to print a paper ballot, sign and certify a paper ballot, and return a paper ballot, I need someone to help me who now sees my choices. And at 3 different points, someone else's eyes and hands touch my ballot. I've had people ask me about my choices and pressure me to change them, and for all I know, they did. No security people have ever expressed concerns about by violating my civil right to submit a paper ballot, the security of my vote is being compromised. We recognize that some believe there are security issues, but given that 32 states have figured this out, Maryland can certainly do so. I want to commend Delegate Feldmark on her really creative idea, and we share in supporting the amendment. We do not believe that security can or should be the end of the conversation. And by making sure that we can independently and privately return our ballots to the Board of Elections, but taking the requirement for us to handle paper, which we can neither see nor usually access or use or own or have in our homes, we are able to resolve this problem and be able to join in democracy and the democratic freedoms that everyone else who can vote by mail does. In terms of a reasonable accommodation, individuals with disabilities would have to request it, would have to opt in, and that is a basic tenet of the ADA. They would need to disclose that they have a disability to be available, to be able to request a reasonable accommodation. That is also a basic tenet of the ADA. Because of this and all of the reasons that we've mentioned previously, and my members have shared with you and the delegate has, I urge a favorable report of the bill with amendment. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. First question is from Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill forward. Definitely something that warrants attention, and I think many of the advocates came to my office. We discussed the bill at length as well. 2 concerns. One, once the ballot is saved on the thumb drive, I think is what vehicle you've offered here to transport it. Someone, unless it is encrypted, someone can still open it and view it. And then to my knowledge, if it's saved as a PDF or the like, it could still be edited. So in between when the person fills out the ballot and saves it and its final destination at, the voting office, could still be viewed and potentially it could still be altered. So that's the part that I'm concerned with. In other words, just because it's no longer on a piece of paper doesn't mean that someone can't still mutilate it or manipulate it.
So thank you, Delegate. I mean, I think, yes, a document on a flash drive could be opened and viewed. So can a paper ballot, right? So I think what we're looking for is trying to give voters with disabilities the same privacy that a voter using a paper ballot has when they're able to complete that on their own and put it in the envelope and put it in the mail. So yes, if someone opens an envelope, whether it's a paper ballot or a ballot on a, saved to a flash drive, yes, someone could theoretically open that and see it. The same is true of a paper ballot.
So in that line of thought, isn't there a device that elects their choices that they print out and then put in an envelope and send in? I'm just trying to understand how this would differentiate from a process that's already in place, because from what I'm hearing is they don't want anyone to see their ballot until it reaches the final destination. But the reality is when it reaches that final destination, it's supposed to be disaggregated from the person.
Right, and
So
it
the
would
folks
be.
at the folks at the polling place can't see, oh, I'm taking this out of Kevin Hornberger's envelope and then looking at the.
Well, when you return a mail-in ballot, you return it with a signed oath, and the the Board of Elections separates those before the ballot is
Correct.
actually viewed or scanned,
By
right?
another party, yep.
Right. So that piece of the process would be the same.
Okay. All right, I'm just not seeing the need for the thumb drive and all that though.
And so the need for the thumb drive as opposed to simply printing it on paper.
And I'm sending it in. Yep.
Okay, so that's where the disability is a key factor, because for someone who doesn't see, first of all, if someone is blind, what use do they have for a printer? Right? So we're kind of assuming a printer is just a normal, if you have a home computer, you're going to have a printer. That's not necessarily true for all people, right? So, and if they have a printer or get access to a printer, assembling papers, printing out an oath that has to be signed by hand, those are things that would require assistance.
Right.
Right.
I could argue the same thing for administering the thumb drive and saving it on, and assuming that they have a computer. Right.
So those of us, many of us, most of us who are blind use assistive technology. For example, I'm reading my testimony to you from my computer, which I have an AirPod in, and it's converting what you would visually see on your screen to audio in my ear. I can't see what's on the screen. What would happen is I would vote my ballot the typical way, except that instead of visually making my choices, I would use it through the audio feedback. And I would also be able to save that electronic delivered ballot that's already the process to a flash drive without having to ever have the use for paper, because I don't own any paper. I don't have a printer. And if I printed it, I wouldn't know where to sign. I wouldn't even know if I printed the right thing. I might be printing the Pizza Hut menu and I wouldn't know it and sending it back in as my ballot. And so by saving it to an electronic media, I can go back and verify that what the ballot says is what I intended it to say. It's who I chose, that I chose to vote for you, delegate. And so then by putting it on a flash drive, I can just shove it in here. Those of us that are using computers are constantly using flash drives, SD cards, other types of media. And then I can put it in the envelope that the Board of Elections has pre-addressed for me. So I don't need assistance with that. I don't need somebody to put my hand on a ballot so I sign exactly in the right certification square, because if I miss the lines of the square, I've spoiled my ballot. All of those things now that I used to not be able to do independently, where people saw my choices, are now private again. And I can put it in a flash drive, which gets transmitted to the board. Instead of me having to print it, the board is then printing from the flash drive or other kind of media. But I've maintained my independence and my privacy, because right now the process is neither private nor independent for me and those of us who cannot use paper or cannot see.
That's very helpful. So when it arrives at the polling location, the thumb drive's inserted in a computer, then what happens?
So the thumb drive would be inserted into a computer that is not connected to anything, not connected to our election system, not connected to the internet, not connected to state networks, right? It would simply be to open the ballot and print it. At that point, once there's a printed ballot in the Board of Elections office, it's the same as a printed ballot that someone put in an envelope and mailed back, and can be processed the same from there.
Divorced from the signature page.
Divorced from the signature page, right? They're two separate documents.
All right. Thank you for explaining the process.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing the bill. I really also want to appreciate National Federation for the Blind of Maryland for your diligent advocacy over the years on this issue, and for helping to think through this potential additional solution to what we all see as a challenge and an issue around making sure that you have the full right to a secret ballot. My questions are about just feasibility in terms of SBE. So I actually wanted to call up S.A. Demarinis. That's my short term for your title. It's a mouthful. Can you talk a little bit? I know this is an amendment that we're just looking at over the last 24 hours that completely changes the bill, but can you talk through just some of the feasibility around the State Board of Elections around being able to implement this?
Sure. State Administrator Jared Demarinis for the record. So there's a couple of I would say, technical stuff that we would have to go through. One, we would have to look at the do it policy because we are now getting an external thumb drive that was out of our control that comes now into our state system here, which is why I think the delegate mentioned a standalone computer as a mitigating factor for that, because we couldn't necessarily put in anything that was from external sources right into our systems because of potential, I would say, malware that could be attached to it. Additionally, so there's going to be costs about getting, I would say, almost like an air-gapped computer and printer for that separate. The other, I would say, cost associated would be getting all the thumb drives that would be associated with this, and actually having then the recipient having the ability to insert a thumb drive as well, because more and more computers now are not necessarily having those ports. You know, Chromebooks are one of the cheapest ones out there, and the whole point is that they are just basically access to the internet, and they don't necessarily have any sort of external type of functionality to that, because everything is Bluetooth, or so there's other limitations on that. I would say the thumb drives itself would have to be a secure method that you know, I would consult with my IT staff as well as with DoIT on, you know, how to make sure that the thumb drive can have the ballot attached to it, just the ballot and nothing else being added to it, having security features for the individual to go and make sure that when they go in there, that they're the only ones that is accessing this rather than anybody else. And that the ballot then, when they're finished with the ballot, that they cannot add any sort of other extraneous, you know, worms on there. I'm not saying that the president here would put a worm on or any of the people behind me, but we have to look at the security concerns about this as well. Additionally, since we are mailing them out, we would have to make sure that whatever we do has some sort of security features on it so that the individual that is receiving this also knows that this is from the State Board of Elections, rather than saying a scam that says, oh, put this into your computer because, you know, and then all of a sudden they're, you know, they've infected their computer with a virus as well. So these are some of the technological concerns initially that with the amendment that is brought up, and the costs, because now I would say every local board would have to have a different computer and then a standby computer, because if there was any sort of, I would say, virus attached to it, we would have to have another computer where that would be operational, that is separate and distinct, that would never have touched or never had any sort of programs attached to it. So those costs would be a part of that and moving forward with it. So just kind of, and then I don't know if there's any special envelopes that are needed because it's paper. It's no longer paper, but it's a little thumb drive. If they need to be protected or anything like that, or how that goes through the mail. So we would have to contact the U.S. Postal Service as well, just to make sure, and just kind of work through these, I would say, you know, issues.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And if you can just remind me when the envelope would get to the Board of Elections, and they're separated, usually the ballot is separated from the envelope. Is it by hand or is it's by machine?
So I would say right now we check it in through machines. Some of the bigger counties have machines, but some of the smaller counties do it by hand. And then the process is, you know, at the end, 2 election judges are going to open up, make sure it's separated, a part of the canvas. And this would be the same sort of deal where it would be an unreadable ballot. At that point there, it would have to be then moved to a scannable ballot. So we would need a team to duplicate the ballot basically from the printer. So we would have a printed ballot and then move it from the printed ballot to a, I would say, a scannable ballot then at that point there, because we would have to have that separate process in there as well for everything.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Any other Delegate Wu?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one question is about for the thumb drive during transition, right? You mail out to the voter and then they did the voting and then mailing back. Then I assume you have a computer which is totally independent from your network, right? How do we ensure during the transition, the sum draft will be, I think you're encrypted them and only the voter can open that? Is that there a mechanism somewhere? Because if a third party intercept that sum draft, that can infect your system, right?
Is that for the administrator or for me?
Yeah, for
Okay.
administrator, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I guess, I mean, that's kind of like, we would have to work out the process. I mean, if this becomes law, that would be a part of the process and through regulations. And I would think that we would have to involve, do it as well, because it is, you know, something that went outside of our control and now is being, you know, imported into it, and to mitigate, if it is the policy and the will of the General Assembly, then we would have to kind of mitigate any security concerns that would necessarily be attached to having external drives being, you know, in our system. So that's why it would have to be a standalone computer, completely never attached to anything, almost air gapped in a sense.
It's not only the security, but confidentiality as well, right? How do you make sure it's the one you send it to the voter and the voter open it, right? Or just did something and then come back is the same one, or not altered somehow.
So I think the confidentiality concerns, and I don't want to speak for the president here, was more on the people that she would be using would know, rather than the election officials, because when the election officials, even in a current mail-in voting process, we still have to open it up at that point there and separate the two. So as for a split second, yes, I know that this piece of paper was attached to Jared Marinus, but at that point there, we kind of separate it. And so that once he goes into the pile, then it becomes basically the secrecy of the ballot. And I think that's where, but I don't want to speak for you on that one there. Sure.
Yeah, I 100% agree with State Administrator Demeritus. Essentially, what happens and what has happened to me personally is that the person who I'm having helping me has asked me, why are you voting for Delegate Atterbury? Not officially, but you know, just example, okay? Why don't you vote for this other person? And of course, that's not permissible under the law. They're not supposed to. But I'm not going to report them because they're going to take me to the doctor tomorrow, or they're going to take me grocery shopping, or they're going to do whatever my next task that I need them to be as a reader. And if they did change my vote, I would have no idea if they changed what's on the paper. And so what the people I know, I don't want the people I know to know how I voted. I don't want the people who are supposed to be helping me to know or to feel any pressure to vote the way that they want me to vote. But if somebody's sitting in the Baltimore City where I live, local board of elections, and they're opening the envelope, they don't know me from Adam. So I don't care if they know how I voted. They'll know for 10 seconds, they'll associate, you know, my name or my identifying marks or whatever it is with my ballot, and then they'll separate it. That ballot will go into the duplication process and it'll be scanned through the scannable system just like everybody else's. So when we talk about privacy, we're talking about privacy in our world, in the people that we interact with on a regular basis. And that's really a problem because we're vulnerable to these people. We need them. And so we're not always going to fight them if they try to influence what we do or who we vote for.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We have 2 unfavorables is at Queen Freechild here, and then we have 1 virtual, C.J. Coles. Whenever you're ready.
Nonprofit. I'm McKinney Freechild with the nonpartisan nonprofit Public Citizen. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of our 15,000 plus supporters in Maryland. In opposition to the internet ballot return portion of HB 775 as written, and in support with specific suggestions regarding the accessibility amendment proposed. We appreciate the careful study the Department of Legislative Services did on the electronic ballot return and risks it can pose to entire elections. the fact that internet ballot return can grant access and not just take it and can take it away and upend elections is not just conjecture. It's happened, as you saw in Australia and also in Ecuador last summer. On the other hand, the proposed amendment that would allow voters with disabilities to return marked ballots using a flash drive could be a game changer. We're committed to ensuring voting access for all voters. I salute Delegate Feldmark and the National Federation of the Blind for this change. I'm thrilled about the prospect of working together on this. The amendment may not be the perfect technical solution, but it's a possible solution that would improve access for voters with print disabilities while minimizing threats to those votes and the overall election. I support the amendment with some modifications. 1, limit it ideally to people with print disabilities by affidavit. 2, test this through a mock election that includes a security and accessibility assessment. 3, for a public demonstration or mock election. In addition to centering voters with print disabilities as we should, please invite election administrators, computer scientists, voting rights advocates, or set up multiple demos to allow more combined input. Pilot the program before committing to this statewide. Create a committee devoted to dialogue and search for additional solutions for voters with print disabilities and those with limited mail options, such as those overseas. And I just want to flag testimony from my colleague at Common Cause. And thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Coles, for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My name is CJ Coles. I represent the nonpartisan nonprofit organization Verified Voting. We're an organization that was founded by computer scientists back in 2004. And our mission is to strengthen democracy for all voters by the responsible use, through promoting the responsible use of technology in elections. Initially, we had signed up as unfavorable, given that the bill that was introduced was centered around electronic ballot return. I commend the Department of Legislative Services for their earlier briefing to this committee, which really laid out the facts, both the possible benefits, but also the possible risks that are associated with electronic ballot return. And I'm happy to see that the sponsors of this bill are pivoting and recommending perhaps different solutions. And we acknowledge that this creative approach, and we appreciate it. However, we also caution not to move too quickly. This is an unproven way to cast a ballot using a flash drive that, as the state administrator said, goes outside of the control of the election officials into the voter's home. And while the computer that might be being used at the election office to retrieve the ballots off of the media device might be air-gapped, I can almost guarantee that the device being used by the voter at home is not air-gapped. They're using a device that is connected to the internet. And some questions have arisen, even in the course just of this discussion, about potential risks associated with that. Malware could be on the voter's computer unknowingly, and that could be then transmitted to potentially this air-gapped device at the elections office. But then what happens to those flash drives? Do those flash drives, once they've been used for the voting process, ever get connected at some point in the future ever to a computer that might be attached to the election network? So it feels a little cart before the horse here. I think we need to figure out the details of this process first, and then come back to the committee with some recommendations and findings about how to achieve both accessibility and security. So thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you. Any questions for either of these witnesses? Okay, thank you both. Mr. Demarinis, I have a question for you, if you don't mind hopping back up. So my question is, are flash drives used now at any point in the process during elections?
At any point, I mean.
Well, like at the polling locations, are flash drives used?
Inside the scanners, no. I mean, they're attached because that's the redundancies that we have for the scanning machines for recounts and everything else. But outside of that, no.
So what were the flash drives? This predates you, but what were the flash drives that were lost in Baltimore City?
Those were the scannable. That was where all the votes were from the scanning machines. So they're inside the scanning machine under lock and key.
Okay.
After we've done LNA, they're in there. So all the ballots that are scanned, and then you have the tape that comes out of it, and then that thumb drive also has the exact same results on it. So we have, that's been in our chain of custody throughout the entire source. So it's never left our chain of custody. We do LNA. They've zeroed it out. They've shown it's zeroed out with the tape. It's been under key and locked. No one has access to that thumb drive. And then they take it and they move forward with it.
So, okay, so senior, I just was trying to understand what those thumb drives were for. So they were in the chain of custody, and this predates you until they weren't.
Right.
Until they went home with somebody.
Exactly, right, yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Right, yes, yeah, and then, everything else, so.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Demarinis? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 775. Delegate Feldmark, House Bill 769.
Can I bring up the witnesses in support of this bill? Good afternoon once again. For the record, I'm still Delegate Jessica Feldmark, here to present House Bill 769. This is a bill you all are getting familiar with. We've heard it a few years in a row now, and I won't belabor the points too long. This is basically expanding, or I should say, enabling local jurisdictions to expand existing public campaign financing programs. So, as you know, about a decade ago or so, the state allowed our counties to establish public campaign financing programs for electing county offices. And this would allow counties that have already done so, have already been through at least one election cycle utilizing that public campaign financing program, to then have the choice to expand to state offices elected at the county level. So that would be our courthouse offices and Board of Education. I think we've done good work in that initial establishment of county programs and in our own state public campaign financing for the governor's race. We know that this opens up opportunities for other candidates to run and be involved. It increases public confidence in the system and limits the impact of large donors in our elections and our policymaking. So with that, I will ask for a favorable report and look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of the bill. I think the good delegate did a great job of explaining the bill. And as she said, this has been in many times before. We think this is a very smart bill in terms of counties proving that they can handle this with one cycle of making this available for legislative and executive offices at the county level. We have a number of counties who are doing this, and more are coming online. So we'd certainly appreciate the flexibility for counties to expand the number of offices for which they can offer local campaign financing, and we'd ask for a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the committee. Morgan Drayton on behalf of Common Cause Maryland, in support of this legislation, which, as the delegate said, would simply permit jurisdictions to continue the expansion of public campaign financing programs at their discretion. We have seen that these programs have been gaining popularity in Maryland, particularly since the Citizens United decision. Americans across the political spectrum have felt that our political system, especially our campaign system, is disconnected from the populace, and that LLCs and wealthy individuals have a outsized effect on how our elections turn out. So small donor public financing programs uplift the voices of regular Marylanders and empower those who have community-supported ideas, who might not have, connections or deep pockets to run as well. Common Cause Maryland supports amplifying those voices of the regular Marylanders in every election for office. And for those reasons, we would request a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Queen Freechild, and then we have Jacqueline Coolidge virtually.
Hello again. Testifying in support of HB 769. We are strong supporters at Public Citizen of public financing, which creates more equitable elections where candidates are able to rely on everyday Maryland voters more than on large donors to run for office. Echoing my colleague at Common Cause, when candidates do not need to be personally wealthy or have a wealthy network in order to run for office, they tend to spend more time talking to everyday Marylanders. Public financing results in candidates and campaigns that are better representative of our state, including groups of people who do not make up the average major donor demographics, including women, working class people, and people of color. Public financing may also help establish new ways for voters to engage in the political process. For example, Seattle uses a public financing program that resulted in a 10% increase in voter turnout compared to previous elections without the program. Earlier and increased outreach by candidates to voters asking for support creates meaningful opportunities for ordinary constituents to be more engaged in our democratic process. A similar program has strengthened democracy in New York City and Washington, D.C. I believe the county should have the discretion to expand a program they desire and can fund. Thank you.
And do we have Ms. Coolidge? For 2 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Jacqueline Coolidge. I'm speaking on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Maryland. We have submitted written testimony. I will not repeat that verbatim. Just want to thank the committee and chairwoman for allowing us to speak in favor of House Bill 769. Personally, I am a registered voter in Montgomery County, Maryland, and we have had use of public finance campaigns for the past few years for county executive and for county council. And I would have to say we are quite happy with seeing how it has been operating. There were some initial hiccups to get over, very minor, but we do believe that it has been very helpful in encouraging a broader range of candidates to participate in these races and to allow for a more level playing field so that candidates who do not necessarily have deep pockets themselves or, very wealthy donors have a really good opportunity to compete in these elections and even win. So we would like to urge a favorable report so that more counties can do this and expand to more races so that we can enjoy a larger pool of candidates. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for either Ms. Coolidge or Ms. Freechild? Okay, seeing none, thank you both very much. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 769. Delegate Wells, House Bill 754.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and esteemed members of Ways and Means. This is my first bill hearing in this committee this year. So I'm here today requesting a favorable report on HB 754. This bill is to repeal the trade-in allowance under the state's vehicle excise tax. So currently the vehicle excise tax is imposed when a vehicle is sold instead of a sales tax. That excess tax rate is 6%, so it's the same as the sales tax. Currently, however, when it comes to repeal, we do not provide the same benefit when someone is simply selling their vehicle to another buyer. It is only provided when a buyer trades in their vehicle via a licensed dealer and applies that trade-in to the value, trade-in value to the purchase of another vehicle from a licensed dealer. And so generally this tax is based on the total purchase price of the vehicle. If you purchase a vehicle from a licensed dealer, that total purchase price used to calculate the tax is reduced by the amount of any vehicle you trade in when purchasing the new vehicle. So just to put that in perspective, if there's a vehicle that you are purchasing where the total purchase value is $35,000, however, the vehicle that you traded in, that value is at $10,000, how you would calculate the excess tax is that you would subtract that $10,000 from that total new purchase value. So that would be a $25,000 value multiplied by the 6%. So you would pay an excess tax of $1,500. So you might be asking, why am I presenting this bill? And as this committee knows, we have a multitude of fiscal challenges, and it is a responsibility of Ways and Means to identify ways for us to close those gaps. And specifically, one of the challenges that we know we have is around the Transportation Trust Fund and the fact that we need billions in revenue. We know how much transportation is vital to our state, but we also know how much it's vital to us being able to capitalize currently on historic federal infrastructure investments, and for us to be able to meet that the state match that those investments are requiring us to be able to meet. So just for some additional details, in terms of how this would contribute to our ability to meet our transportation needs, this would increase our highway user revenue by about $23 million in fiscal 25. Additionally, between fiscal 2025 and 2029, it increases our transportation bond capacity by an estimated $1 billion. And additionally, in terms of our local jurisdictions, it increases additional highway user revenue funding by about 3.5 million. And I want to clarify and just be clear that this is supplemental funding, so it is not supplanting existing funding. Additionally, for your consideration, I do have a sponsor amendment. So as we just attempt to meet our climate goals, we know that we need to further incentivize moving to cleaner vehicles. So the amendment that I have had drafted would retain a portion or all of the trade-in exemption for cleaner vehicles. Specifically, it retained the 100% of the value of vehicle trade-in for purchase of an electric vehicle, and it would retain 25% of the value of the vehicle trade-in for purchase of a hybrid vehicle. And we know that there continues to be some challenges for dealers to be able to move these kind of vehicles. And so with that, I am urging a favorable report from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And Delegate Wells, I want to thank you for bringing this to consideration to this committee, because it is our job to look at all the revenue options available to us and make some tough decisions. So this is one option that we will have available to us. So thank you. Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, my friend. We talk all the time, all day long. So I know. I do not have a shy and retiring voice. It's my cross to bear. I know. So I guess my question, you mentioned that if you sell your used car to a third party, it's not a trade-in, as a transaction. Do you pay, does that person that purchases the car, do they have to pay the vehicle excise tax?
Yes.
Okay. And so when I guess what I'm saying, you said that, there's a distinction between the transactions and how they're taxed, which I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I just think the distinction is because of the nature of the transaction. So if I trade my car in, I have a $15,000 value used car. I traded in to buy a $40,000 car. I'm not spending $40,000 for that car. I'm spending $25,000 for that car. The dealer, which under the current law, that's what I would pay the excise tax on, correct? The $25,000, not the full $40,000 sticker price, because I'm not paying that.
Mm-hmm.
The dealer is taking my $15,000 car and very likely marking that car up to $16,000 or $17,000 or $20,000, whatever the market would bear. And then he's turning around, or she's turning around maybe that afternoon or maybe the next week and reselling that car. And you're getting the vehicle excise tax on that as well, right? The person who comes into the dealer's lot, buys the used car that's now marked up to 20, we're getting the tax revenue on my car. We're just getting it when it's sold to the third party ultimate.
I think ultimately, though, it's each party involved having to pay part of the tax, right? So each person that's purchasing is part of paying that tax.
And I mean,
I understand what you're saying. I get that. Like, they're able to turn around and I sell my car, but each person is is responsible for paying a portion of the value of the vehicle, the excise tax.
So I appreciate that. I guess what I'm saying is, to me, it seems like a classic case of double taxation, because I'm sitting there and saying, on Monday, I trade my car in for 15,000 to the dealer, and I have to pay the full vehicle excise tax on that price, even though I'm not really paying it. And on Tuesday, the dealer sells the car to my next door neighbor, and the state reaps the full vehicle. In fact, probably reaps more, because oftentimes the dealer is selling it for a little bit of a premium. That's how they stay in business. So it seems to me like we're taxing my car, the value of that trade-in car, twice in the transaction tree. Does that make sense?
I get what you're saying. I think
Okay.
we're having a philosophical discussion about how sales tax should work. And that's not what this bill is essentially speaking to, but I do understand what you're saying. I think we just disagree on it.
Thank you.
Delegate Hartman.
Yeah, along with the lines of Delegate Buckle, I mean, when you're buying something for the purchase, if you're a contractor buying material and using it in a job or whatever, there's certain, you're not taxed again on those things. In the same regard, I'm also concerned as to the fiscal note. I mean, I think a lot of people take advantage of that when they're, considering what it's going to cost them for that vehicle. And I think we really need to consider what it's going to do to our local businesses. I think I would drive a car a lot longer, especially as they're getting more expensive, which we all know they are. Trading a car every 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden, if that $30,000 or $40,000 trade-in on your $60,000 or $70,000 vehicle is no longer tax-free, you're adding $2,400 or more easily to the price of the car. So just concerned as to the fiscal note not being realistic in what it does to the reality of the frequency of the sales. And I think in the long run would feel pain. So but
Was there a question?
I think that's,
isn't that so? Isn't that so? That was the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Delegate Wells? Okay, thank you, Delegate Wells. We have some unfavorables: Peter Kitzmiller, Michael Johansson, Franz Schneiderman, and John Fiestro.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Peter Kitzmiller. I'm the president of the Maryland Automobile Dealers Association. We represent 300 franchise new car and truck dealers and their 20,000 employees. We're here today in opposition to House Bill 754. Just a couple of notes real quickly. So COVID, obviously, and specifically to our industry, the chip shortage created a dramatic shortage of vehicles. If you've went to buy a vehicle in the last 3 years, you're certainly aware of that. My average dealer in Maryland received 70% less inventory than before COVID. Those things have started to change a little bit. We still aren't back to normal. But if you look at the average price of a new vehicle, before COVID, it was less than $37,000. The average new car price in Maryland currently today is $48,000. Used car prices have increased significantly more than used car prices. And so when we talk about the trade difference, I mean, I think it's kind of instructive. If you buy an average new car in Maryland today, $48,000, you trade in a car that's worth $30,000, you pay excise tax at 6% on the $18,000. That's $1,080. You take the trade difference away on that same vehicle, you're paying 6% of $48,000. That's $2,880. That $1,800 difference is going to keep a lot of our customers out of the market. We're in a marketplace right now where affordability is the biggest issue that we have to deal with. We have interest rates above 7% for car loans now. Again, the average price of a car has gone up almost 25% since COVID. And now we're going to put another $1,800 or whatever your particular transaction is, a significant amount more in excise tax when you purchase the vehicle. We are going to be keeping people out of the marketplace longer, which obviously for my members is not something we want to do. And I don't think it's something the state wants to do either. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm Mike Johansson with the Rifkin Firm on behalf of the Washington Area New Auto Dealers Association. Looking at the fiscal note, this is $200 million a year in additional excise taxes, an increase in excise taxes by Maryland titling people that live in Maryland of $200 million a year. I I do agree with Mr. Kitzmiller. This will reduce the churn. So if I have a car that's worth 20,000 and I turn it in today, I know I'm going to get some credit for that. There's an incentive to turn that car in, trade it in. Every time you trade in a car, you're probably getting a newer car. And whether it's a new electric vehicle, which I appreciate, or a new vehicle that meets the current standards, it's probably a cleaner vehicle. So if you reduce the number of transactions, you're probably not improving air quality as quickly. Secondly, the fiscal note does not take into account the reduction in number of transactions. So if you hold that car 2 months longer, 6 months longer, that's one less churn of a transaction that generates additional tax revenue. So in my view, it's $200 million direct tax increase, but also tax lawsuit of fewer transactions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is John Fiastro here on behalf of Maryland Independent Auto Dealers Association. The Maryland Independent Auto Dealers Association numbers nearly 100 members, used car dealers across the state. And to echo one or two items that were mentioned and a few others. When you reduce the churn, as Mr. Johansson mentioned, you do reduce the amount of cash flow that comes into and working capital for Maryland's existing independent auto dealers. But further, you reduce available inventory that is going to be made available to Maryland buyers. Right now, about 30% of our members, about 30% of their inventory actually comes from trade-ins. What you'll be doing then by passing something like this is encouraging private sale, citizen to citizen, as opposed to dealer to citizen. This will make actually dealer experience a little bit more difficult to get new inventory on the lot because they're going to have to leave their lot to go to auctions in order to get new inventory, bring it on their lot, and make sales. So it's going to make business operations a little bit more difficult than they are today to increase that amount of inventory. Further, it will change the dynamics, as I mentioned, of inventory acquisition and actually reduce a degree of transparency in terms of the costs incurred and dollars spent on vehicles within the state. Licensed dealers are required by law and by reg to respond to MVA with all sales information. So there is great transparency in terms of pricing. That is not the case when it comes to private sales. Most people fudge their private sales. They say, well, it was a gift, or they'll fudge the number down so that they don't have to pay the excise tax. So we have a lot of transparency as a state right now in terms of trade-ins and what the values are. That decreases when we encourage private sale. So for this reason, Maryland Independent Automobile Dealer Association requests an unfavorable report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Franz Schneiderman. I represent Consumer Auto Maryland. We're a consumer advocacy group, works to protect Maryland consumers and particularly Maryland drivers. I want to say first that I appreciate Delegate Wells' commitment. I know she shares our commitment to affordable transportation and concerned about the cost. I've worked with her on a number of bills in the past and expect to do so in the future on those issues, but I am concerned about the way this bill raises the cost of buying a car at a time when the cost of buying a car has already gotten really difficult for many Marylanders to afford. If you eliminate the write-off for a $15,000 trade-in, that adds $900 to the cost of a transaction. If the car's worth $20,000, it adds $1,200. But, the prices are way up, as Mr. Kitzmiller indicated. And the cost of owning a car has just gotten very burdensome. AAA estimated last year that the cost of owning a new car was more than $12,000 a year. The average new car payment now in 2023 was $730. Even for a used car, the average payment was $530. And, insurance and repair and maintenance are also way up. So it's just becoming really burdensome for people to meet the need for transportation. I understand the state has a real need for transportation revenue. And there are a number of proposals out there on, retail delivery fees and other things. I also think For instance, the gas tax does more to encourage efficiency than a tax like this does, which doesn't really encourage efficiency. So, I think this, just adds a burden that consumers really don't need right now, and the state can look at some better alternatives for new taxation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Delegate Fair?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming and providing your testimony. Mr. Kitzmiller, you had, I just wanted to zero in kind of on your comments about the current cost of motor vehicles and its increase over the last couple of years. I also saw similar research that showed a pretty substantial increase in the cost of motor vehicles across the state of Maryland. Do you have any insight to what is causing that increase in costs?
I think certainly in our industry, COVID impacted everybody and impacted a lot of costs, but for our industry specifically, it was the chip shortage.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, it's like a couple hundred computer chips per vehicle. They're older computer chips, so a lot of companies that can build computer chips didn't put the car manufacturer at the front of the line. So that was what triggered, a shortage in vehicles. And again, I've been representing car dealers for almost 40 years. I've never seen the shortage of inventory we had for the 3 years prior. We were a dealer that normally would have 150 vehicles on the lot and might have 25. And so obviously that impacted the price of the new car, and then used cars as well were squeezed because people were going, hey, I can't afford a new car. So they're going to go into the market to get a used car. The rental car companies, we're looking for cars. The manufacturers couldn't build them cars either. So all those things that contributed to the prices going up. Again, I think in the last 6 months, and you're going to continue to see this, it's leveled off. I don't think there's any chance we're going to go from 48,000 back down, but the amount of the increase is not going to be as dramatic going forward. But we're probably at this level, maybe drop a little bit, but that's kind of where we are at this point.
Yeah, so that's kind of my follow-up is just as inventory levels off, do you see the average price of a car in Maryland compared to other states, which is lower? Do you see the average cost of a car, a new car or used car going down at any point? And
I think nationwide, certainly the average price of a used car is going to probably this year maybe decrease. New cars as well. Again, we're not going from 48,000 back down to 37,000, but yeah, the inventories are not back to normal, but they're getting there, and we're getting back to a normal car market at this point.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 754, Delegate Wells, House Bill 765. And you have Chuck Cook, Nick Simpson, Kevin Canali, and then one favorable with amendment that is virtual.
Okay. Back again with Delegate Wells for the record, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of Ways and Means. I think I'm back with a less controversial bill this time. But today presenting on HB 765, which is property tax credit for hotel or residential development. So HB 765 would authorize local jurisdictions to issue property tax credits for hotels and residential developments that meet minimum affordability requirements. The bill would allow counties and municipalities to grant taxes for construction or revitalization and rehabilitation development projects that substantially increase the assessed value of the property, and for projects that include more than 20,000 residential units, comprising at least 15% of them as units of affordable housing for those earning less than 80% of the area median income. The governing body of local jurisdictions would be allowed to determine the amount, duration, eligibility requirements, and application procedures for the tax credits. And as you heard earlier, and you'll probably hear again, we know that currently the state of Maryland has a housing shortage of 96,000 units. So local government property tax incentives will continue to be an important tool for housing development, as they can tip the balance sheet in favor of projects that are otherwise unviable. And so with that, I ask for a favorable report, and I'll let you hear from my panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Appreciate it. 2 in 1 day. Again, Housing Day at E&T coming down to Ways and Means. So I appreciate it. Again, for the record, my name is Chuck Cook with Department of Housing and Community Development. As the sponsor just noted, and I told you in my previous testimony, I would reference the 96,000 housing unit shortage. I do want to bring a little history to this bill itself. So back in 2021, this body passed a bill and we went into law that allowed for this same almost identical program in Wycomico County. Some of you may know that the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development was the mayor of Salisbury at the time. This was a very near and dear to his heart. Specifically to get a project off the ground or projects off the ground in Wycomico County. And you're going to hear in a few minutes from Nick Simpson to my right, who actually used this credit in Wycomico County. And so we wanted to bring him in to talk a little bit more about this. Just suffice to say that because of how well this seems to be working down here in Wycomico County, the intent here, and we're very thankful to the sponsor, is to spread this this concept statewide. So without any further ado, I want to hand it over to Nick Simpson, the developer for a project in Wycomico County, to talk a little bit about that project.
Yeah, so my name is Nick Simpson, and I'm here in support of the bill because I've used it and it works. Because when we're doing new projects as developers, we find a lot of times that 1 and 1 don't equal 2 for new projects, and that was the case in downtown Salisbury, where we were able to break ground on the first ground up development in over 50 years and attract the necessary equity, which was roughly $15 million plus the additional bank financing that was necessary for our project by using this tax credit program. It was what tipped the returns over and attracted the necessary development dollars for those projects. And I think that's what's at the heart of this legislation for the rest of Maryland is each and every community can redevelop or put an incentive as they see fit, whether it be the J1 visa housing problem in Ocean City or redevelopment of a mall or office complex that's going to be vacant or needs development. And that's what Wycomico County put in place with the city of Salisbury was the downtown redevelopment area. And that's where we were able to use this legislation to attract the necessary equity for our projects. But what we've seen is that a lot of other carry-on projects are coming to the table now and are trying to get into the ground. And I think this helps offset a lot of the inflation, the higher interest rates and stuff that were, the challenges that all developers are seeing. And I guess to sum this up, I would put a favorable report to this legislation and hope that you take it back to your local communities and mend it to be exactly what is best for those communities so that we can continue to see development here in this state rather than others.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in strong support of the bill. You have my written testimony and then me too.
Best testimony of the day. Any questions? Well, we do have someone virtually. Let me see. Okay, let's let him come in. Delegate Wells, this person is favorable with amendment. Robert Taylor. Mr. Taylor, we need you to turn your camera on. Unmute yourself, please, and turn your camera on. One moment, please.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Any questions for the folks that are here? Yes, Delegate Attar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this bill. Quick question, I guess Chuck, you could answer it. You mentioned that Wycomico County has been doing this for a couple of years, and I missed the part. Did we have state law put in place a couple of years ago allowing them to do this?
Yeah, so it was actually passed in 2021 to enable the county and the city of Salisbury to then offer their own tax credits.
So it was a local identical bill.
Correct. Fundamentally, what this bill does is it brackets out the word Wycomico and makes it larger and adds some affordability measures.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Wells, for bringing the bill. I'm just wondering if you can talk through about why hotels are included, because I mean, I think for residential projects that include an affordability component like that intuitively makes sense, but if you can speak to the hotel piece, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I can begin and see if the HCD has anything to add to it, but we know especially in places like Baltimore, and we also know here with our hotel tax, we know how much that does contribute. We know that especially in Baltimore where we're trying to redevelop, just using a very localized example, but there may be others across the state that you all are familiar with, trying to renovate our convention center. We know that a big impediment, one of the impediments to doing that as well and continuing to ensure it's desirable is also growing, just renovating our hotel stock and continuing to make that a desirable destination. We have CIAA coming next week, actually, and that is providing significant boom in terms of revenue generation. So we want to continue to make ourselves competitive as a state, but also as a city as well.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the original intent about when this was done in Wycomico was also because of the proximity to Ocean City and the overflow there is to make it easier for hoteliers to build. And then when we were talking to other localities around the state, the ability to offer that same tax credit so they can bring hotels, conference centers, stuff like that to their areas. It seemed to be not only an affordability issue on housing, but also the ability to bring in folks from out of state and build hotels at a lower cost.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 765. Delegate Fair, House Bill 925. Oh, we should have just did you after the last excise tax bill, and then the same folks could come up and testify against that one.
Did we though?
This one.
Need to do that.
Sorry, I missed that, or I would have done that.
Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and esteemed members of the Ways and Means Committee. House Bill 925 proposes a small modification of the Maryland's motor vehicle excise tax rate from 6% to 6.5%. This move is financially astute and essential to meet the state's infrastructure needs. According to a recent report by the Federal Highway Administration, our infrastructure and transportation costs have increased by 50% in the last 2 years. That means a project that cost $100 million 2 years ago, now costs $150 million to complete throughout our country. Since its last update in 2007, the excise rate has been one of the few targeted revenue streams to protect our transportation system. The 0.5% increase is modest when purchasing a vehicle in Maryland that can substantially improve our transportation funding challenges. For perspective, the increase in the purchase of a $30,000 vehicle in Maryland would be $150. The 0.5% change could produce additional revenue for the state's critical transportation portfolio north of $85 million annually. The excise rate fund goes directly to the Transportation Trust Fund, helping every county in Maryland afford numerous transportation projects and transit equity-based programs. This critical lifeline to our transportation portfolio impacts every Marylander's quality of life. It's worth mentioning that even with this adjustment, Maryland's excise rate remains competitive within the region, considering the varying rates and structures of neighboring states. A 0.5% increase represents a careful balance, keeping Maryland appealing to residents and businesses while securing essential infrastructure funding. The tax increase is fundamentally an investment in Maryland's future, promising to address funding shortfalls, bolster local economies, and improve residents' quality of life. I request a favorable committee report for House Bill 925, marking a step forward in maintaining Maryland's infrastructure and upholding our dedication to fiscal prudence and regional competitiveness. Thank you for your time.
Okay, questions, Delegate Buckle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one question, you mentioned that we would still, in your view, still be competitive with neighboring jurisdictions. Do you have any information? A lot of times they include that in the fiscal note, but this fiscal note is pretty sparse as to what, say, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, Delaware, if they have comparable excise taxes. If you don't, I'm not trying to play gotcha. You know that. I'm just wondering if you had the information.
No, I do. And thank you for the question. West Virginia's excise tax rate is 6%. Pennsylvania's is 6% as well. DC's is a variable rate depending on the weight of the car and other various components, but it can go up to 10% and as low as 1% in some very rare situations. And then Delaware is 4.25% and Virginia is 4.15%.
So if we went to 6.5, I think it'd be fair to say we'd be the highest in the region. We'd be higher than second, maybe behind DC.
Behind DC
for certain classifications of vehicles.
By about 0.5% over Pennsylvania and West Virginia, who are at 6% currently.
Okay. And then I had a question, maybe if you understood, I mean, I think I understand the way that the fiscal notes read on this and also Delegate Wells' bill. The fact that they essentially this particular bill essentially amounts to about $100 million a year direct tax increase in terms of transportation trust fund revenues. But then it also suggests that our bond revenues will dramatically increase. So does that suggest that we'll be borrowing more money because we'll be taxing people more money?
That is not how I read it, but I will get back to you. I'll have to look into that and get back to you. I'm sorry. I don't have that information.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Delegate.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Calling up Peter Kitzmiller, Michael Johansson, Franz Schneiderman, and John Fiastro.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, Peter Kitzmiller, President, Maryland Automobile Dealers Association. We're here today in opposition to House Bill 925. This is better than the trade difference bill. As we talked about before, car affordability is a big issue. I did want to point out Delegate Buckles' question. So our surrounding states, Virginia is 4.15% on the purchase of a vehicle, but they're one of 3 states that does not give credit for the trade difference. Virginia, California, and Hawaii are the 3 that do not. Again, we've talked about the affordability of vehicles with interest rates being over 7%. It just makes it very difficult for our customers at this point and for us to figure out ways to get people financed. And so this would add to that difficulty. I would point out in closing that Maryland Auto Dealers recognizes the fact that the state of Maryland is dealing with a significant shortfall with regards to transportation. We worked with the General Assembly back in 2007. I think the last time we looked at transportation, and we look forward to working with this committee and the General Assembly going forward to come with solutions that will help close that gap, but also make it affordable for people to buy vehicles. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm Mike Johansson on behalf of the Washington Area New Auto Dealers Association in opposition to the 8% increase in the current excise tax. 0.5% is honestly 8.3%. So we just need to put it in that perspective. Peter mentioned this is a little bit better because in aggregate, this is only $100 million increase in people that purchase cars. As Peter said, we understand the needs of the state. In fact, as car dealers, we love good roads because the better the roads, the more people love to drive and buy cars. But this is a significant increase if you look at it in aggregate $100 million. And we will work with you to do what we can to help solve the problem.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Fiastro on behalf of Mid-Atlantic Independent Auto Dealers. The independent auto dealers are the used car dealers for the state of Maryland. The Independent Auto Dealers Association is opposed to House Bill 925. Our customers, our members' customers look for and pursue value on a daily basis. A lot of our members sell to those who are buying their first car on limited incomes. A increase as contemplated in House Bill 925 puts a undue burden onto them, makes it more difficult to get that first car, makes it more difficult to make their household finances go further. So for that reason, Maryland Independent Auto Dealers ask for an unfavorable report on House Bill 925. Thank you.
Thank you. Franz Schneiderman, Consumer Auto, Maryland. Again, I share my colleagues' concerns about the way this, makes car buying even more expensive. This isn't as burdensome as the other one. I mean, it looks to me like given the average price of a new car, it would add about $250 to the cost. For a average used car, it would add about $150. That is an additional burden, particularly since, more and more consumers are struggling to repay their loans. In fact, last month, the rate of people more than 30 days behind on their auto loans it reached 7.7%, the highest rate since 2010, when we were just recovering from the financial crisis. So, the affordability is a real struggle for people. And, again, I promise I won't oppose every revenue enhancement that would create some costs for Maryland drivers, because I know some of them are necessary, but I think we should look at some that do more to promote efficiency and perhaps are a little less regressive than this approach of raising the excise tax. So, ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much.
Yeah.
That concludes the hearing on House Bill 925. Delegate Eversol, House Bill 663. And well, this is, okay. Okay. We're waiting on our friends. We're gonna go ahead and get started, but we have some friends joining us from ECM. In the meantime, Delegate Eversol, you can bring up whomever you'd like to. How are you? Yeah.
So like Delegate Wells, believe it or not, this is my first bill in front of the committee this year. I know. Go figure, huh? I know. I have a single digit number of bills this year, so I'm in good shape. Okay, there's a bill that I brought a couple of years ago. I thank you very much for your consideration of House Bill 663. This is a bill about alcohol, and usually these are in ECM, and that's why a couple of them will be joining us in a minute or two. But it's really about taxation and reasonable taxation. Our tax system for alcohol is set up with excise taxes that are basically based on the strength of the drink, okay? We have three major categories: spirits, wine, and beer. And spirits are taxed at $1.50 per gallon, and I'm going to make sure I get my figures correct here. By the way, I'll point out parenthetically that if you go over 100 proof, this is an interesting thing, the tax goes up for each point of proof over 100. It's taxed at 40 cents per gallon for wine and at 9 cents per gallon for beer. This should be pretty clear to you. Anybody who knows about sort of ABV, alcohol by volume, spirits tend to run around 40% alcohol or so, 80 proof. That's generally, they can go a little higher. Wine tends to run around the 15% area. They don't put proofs on wine, they just give percentages. And for those of you who drink really cheap beer, about 4 or 5%. And for those of you who drink more expensive beers, you can get up to 8, 9, even 11%. But you can see where that there's sort of categories here for them. And actually something called, and this is really what this is about, ready to drink cocktails. They've been around for a very long time, over 100 years. But in the last 30 or so, they've become very, very popular. I don't drink them, so I can't name all the brands, but I bet you could, some of you, because they're delicious, all right? But the problem is since they have spirit alcohol in them quite often, they're taxed at the same rate as a bottle of bourbon. A bottle of bourbon is alcohol at 40%. If you buy these, they are also taxed at the exact same rate, but their alcohol content it can run as low as beer, 4, 5, 6%. Sometimes it can run up to 10 or 15%. And so the point of this is to reclassify those not as spirits, but put them into the category, not call them wines, but put them into the same category as wine as a more fair way of taxing them. And so that's all this seeks to do is to reclassify those and tax them. And with that, I've had my fun talking about booze, and I'm going to let somebody else talk a little bit.
You want me to go first? Do you want to go first?
You guys shoot.
Okay. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Andy Deloney with the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States. In 2023, there were more than 62 million cases of spirit-based ready-to-drink cocktails, or RTDs, sold in the U.S. The U.S. market is expected to grow more than 200 million cases, benefiting consumers and state coffers if there is fairer taxation. Unfortunately, Maryland producers like the two you'll be hearing from in a moment pay much higher taxes to produce a spirit-based RTD product, even if the product has the exact same or similar amount of alcohol by volume as a malt, sugar, or wine-based product. For example, the Maryland tax rate on a spirit RTD is about 17 times the rate paid for malt and sugar-based products. The excessive burden is a steep hurdle for any Maryland small distiller that may want to enter this growing category. In fact, in a survey that we conducted, 62% of craft distillers that are not in the market currently cited the higher taxes for these products as a barrier to entering the market. Our economic analysis indicates that the Maryland Treasury would realize about $8 million in new tax revenues from this category within the next 5 years based on the excise tax and current 9% sales tax rate if this legislation were to be enacted. Adjusting the tax rate on these low alcohol products will only increase jobs in Maryland's spirit sector, which today supports more than 24,800 Maryland jobs and $743 million in wages. We believe this is common sense. In fact, 24 states have already enacted legislation to reduce tax rates for low alcohol spirit-based products such as these, and many more are considering similar changes in the current legislative sessions. Certainly not unusual, and the change will create a more level playing field for these products and for Maryland producers, fair with those products that have other types of alcohol as their base, which is good for consumer producers alike. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monica Pierce. I am the founder and owner of 10th Ward Distilling Company out of Frederick, Maryland, and I am here in support of this bill. When we shut down our doors to our cocktail bar and tasting room because of COVID, we did everything we could to keep the lights on, to pay our staff. One of those things was to start producing canned cocktails because it seemed like a pretty cool opportunity to deliver a delicious cocktail in a safe method, already packaged in a beautiful can. It has taken off for us, and I'm very thankful for that opportunity, but I will say we have challenges even making profits off of this, paying our bills on the cost to produce an item like this, because the margins are already really small for canned items. But a can of beer, a can of wine, a 4-pack of that, even a malt seltzer, for example, you can see right now on the shelf for $10, $11, $12, even some 6-packs. We can't get close to that right now, and it makes it really challenging for us to compete and to get to the sales that we really need to or want to be at to grow our business. Another disparity here is the unsafe health ideas that it gives people that a beer or a wine might be softer than a canned beverage that has spirit in it. And so I brought up some examples for you today. I have a 12-ounce can that is 9.5% ABV of an IPA. I have a 12-ounce can that is an 8% malt beverage that was probably just made with a bunch of bulk sugar bought from somewhere in bulk malt. And then 10th Ward's delicious espresso martini. This is 8.4 ounces at 7% ABV. Now, we all know how math and science works, but I can tell you that just because these have different types of ingredients in them, it doesn't mean that one is going to get you drunker than the other. It is actually the alcohol by volume that affects you or impairs your body when you're drinking. I'll also say that this is made from real natural ingredients, sourced by local farms here in Frederick County. We're a local manufacturer making this all ourselves. I really appreciate your support today and hearing me. Thank you. Here, move my beer over.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, esteemed members of the committee. Thank you for your time and attention today regarding creating a fair tax structure for ready to drink or RTD canned cocktails made with spirits. My name is Holly Seaton. I own Spring Hill Distillery in Hebron, just outside of Salisbury. As the first distillery in Wicomico County, we have been through some hurdles in over 5 years of building our distillery operation. During that time, RTDs have changed the market for spirit sales. And with the passage of this bill and evening the competitive playing field, while it is in the interest of distilleries, it is also the tax revenue that will benefit the state economy when the volume of sales increases with more production, because more of us as emerging craft distillers will be able to enter the market if the tax is lowered. As a startup distillery without investors, continually meeting the challenges that come our way, we are considering a canning operation of RTDs, calculating a break-even analysis of purchasing the equipment and beginning production. It would be profitable for both us and the state. However, the taxes on spirit-based RTDs put a halt to that innovation. Lowering the tax would open the opportunity up for us to enter the RTD market and therefore grow our business, leading to us being able to provide more employment opportunities to our local community. If the tax rate comes down, we would be able to make the leap, but only if the rate is closer to other RTD alcohol categories. Thank you for your time and consideration of passing House Bill 663.
Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a couple questions. Thank you all for being here, and I love the visual aid. That really helps me sometimes, so thank you.
They're open to you.
They're-
Can
okay.
smell them a little bit. It's great.
It
smells like IPA.
Yeah, a little bit.
So thank you. So you mentioned like 24 states have enacted it. What have been the experiences? Could you expound on that part a little bit? What have the experiences that those states have had in growth and everything?
Certainly, just as Shelley was just speaking to, and that is what happened in a number of other states when you lower the tax rate, is that in particular smaller producers now find it less cost prohibitive to get into this space and to produce a product to compete with some of the larger, more established players. As a matter of fact, in the state of Michigan, that's exactly what Spence Nevins, who is the executive director of the Michigan Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association, stated, is that after the tax rate went down, it allowed smaller producers, mostly in-state producers who were not yet in that market, to enter the market with a product that got onto the shelves and the retailers, were being distributed by the wholesalers, and could be competitive.
Okay, and that's what you meant by, so then the market is with the fairer taxation, market expect to grow, more.
Yep,
people
as Holly just stated again,
Yeah.
would allow more producers to get into it.
Okay, and then how much have you guys, I know this is a very popular product for you. How much has it grown? How much has it taken off? What's been your experience as you've gotten into this market?
Yeah, so we started producing cans in 2020 and then invested in our very first canning line that we purchased and installed our own come this August. That was really exciting for us. So now we are canning we can can up to 10,000 cans a month. We're not quite there yet because it's expensive to produce that. Part of that is, and part of the reasons it's more expensive for us to produce this is because we're sourcing the materials, then distilling it, fermenting it, then distilling it, then blending it, and then canning it, as opposed to my counterparts who don't have to do that as much. But right now we probably are producing and selling about 3,000 to 5,000 cans a month, depending on the season. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Delegate Buckle.
Delegate Eversole, just trying to compare, let's put them in sort of three buckets.
Yeah.
So if I'm reading this correctly, what you're doing with this bill is you would set the rate for these ready to drink liquor-based cocktail, distilled spirits-based cocktail. It would be at the same rate as wine.
Yeah.
Is that correct, by the gallon?
Absolutely.
And so that's 40 cents per gallon. And the per gallon tax on beer would be 9 cents per gallon.
That's
Is that right?
accurate.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't know how, I mean, the reason wine is because, as I pointed out, the alcohol content, the maximum sort of alcohol content you can find in these tends to be around the maximum you find for wine also. So they're comparable. I'm using ABV. I mean, there's an argument for taxing based on alcohol by volume across the board and having but that's that's too complicated to change right now. So within this given system,
And it would
it's which way to
change
go.
based as products roll out. I mean, there are always some variations in these.
I mean, that's why I point out there is a reference to it, because when you get over 100 proof for distilled, it's a small addition for each point over proof that you go. So there is a way of looking at it by ABV, but in this case, we're just looking at the three broader categories. And thank you for the question.
You're just carving this out and saying you're not going to get taxed as liquor, the $1.50 per. We're going to drop you to the wine rate, but you're still more than 4 times higher than beer.
Buying one of these is not like buying a pint of Jack Daniels. Okay, they're
I would never do such a thing.
They're
so I
very
don't know what
different.
you're
No,
referring
and
to.
my friends tell me that's true. I've asked them several times. So.
Yeah, it's really just putting us on a fair playing field with our counterparts. That's all we're asking for.
Thank you for explaining.
We have, well, first, let's welcome our friends from ECM, delegates Valderrama, Jackson, and Wyville, who are listening. And we have, I'm going to bring up, we have another individual virtually signed up favorable before we do the unfavorables, Thomas Perrick. For 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Atterbury and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm Tom Perrick, National Director of State Government Affairs for the American Distilled Spirits Alliance. On behalf of our members, who are all distillers and produce roughly 70% of the spirits sold in the U.S., including hundreds of the spirits brands you would be familiar with, we urge your support of House Bill 663. As is being discussed now, our spirits-based beverages, regardless of alcohol content, are taxed at full strength, currently at $1.50 a gallon. As 663 contemplates creating this new category for ready-to-drink beverages, we appreciate the Assembly considering a fair, lower alcohol by volume tax rate on popular low-proof RTD beverages. Our members believe that low-proof, spirits-based, ready-to-drink products should be more fairly taxed at the same rate or near the same rate as beer and wine offerings with similar low alcohol by volume. And in this case, at 40 cents per gallon tax on low-proof, spirits-based RTDs. As was just being discussed, at 40 cents a gallon on these low-proof RTDs, that's much more competitive than the current $1.50 gallon, currently being assessed on full-strength alcohol, which again, RTDs are not. It's fair that I note that even at 40 cents a gallon for this new category, this proposed tax rate is still 4 times that of a similar malt-based RTD product. So we generally support tax fairness for similar products and similar alcohol by volume. 663 recognizes this important factor and gets us closer to tax fairness of like products. As my counterparts on the panel just noted, many states, to one degree or another, already recognize that lower alcohol by volume spirits should not be taxed at the same rate as full-strength spirits, such as those in your homes and liquor cabinets. Instead, these lower proof, ready-to-drink products should be taxed at lower, more competitive rate. I did submit a comment letter and refer you to that as well. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions from the committee for this group of individuals? Okay, seeing none, thank you. And I'd like to call up Catherine Marsick, Brian Crawford. I think Catherine, you're Catherine and Katie Marsick. So whoever you want to be today, come on up.
Madam Chairman, my name is Brian Crawford. I'm the president and CEO of the Beer Institute, and I thank you for allowing me to testify on behalf of the 33,000 Marylanders who are employed by the beer industry. I am a native Marylander. The beer industry opposes House Bill 663, a proposal that would reduce the tax rate on canned cocktails made with hard liquor. The proposal would reduce Maryland's hard liquor-based excise tax rate by a whopping 73%, according to the fiscal note, will result in a loss to the state treasury of more than $1.8 million in FY25 and more than $2 million annually beginning in FY29. Ultimately, Maryland consumers and our state's bottom line are the ones who will be the most hurt by any move to lower excise tax rates for canned cocktails, not our friends in the liquor industry. Evidence shows that tax cuts like these do not trickle down to consumers or support local businesses like bars and restaurants. How do we know this? It was Maryland's owned Alcohol and Tobacco Commission Ready to Drink Alcohol Tax Report in 2023, which analyzed tax cuts passed in Michigan and Nebraska for canned cocktails. And it showed no cost savings for consumer or additional tax revenue for the state. In fact, I quote, the tax reduction for low-proof spirits has not led to an increase of sales of these products to fully offset the revenue loss, nor did the retail cost of these products change in any beneficial way for the consumers. Let's be clear, liquor companies, notwithstanding the two folks that testified previously, the small business owners, Big liquor companies are using canned cocktails to recruit new consumers to their higher ABV, higher priced premium products. As noted by the president and CEO of Brown-Forman, maker of Jack Daniels and Woodford Reserve. The CEO said, and I quote, consumer recruitment, this is a consumer recruitment vehicle, bringing new consumers of legal drinking age into the Jack Daniels family. I urge the committee to consider the ramifications of this proposal and oppose the bill. I thank you for your time.
Hello, my name's Katie Marisick, and I'm here on behalf of the Brewers Association, the national trade association dedicated to promoting and protecting America's small and independent brewers. But if the chair is giving me the choice today, I would like to be Beyonce. So proponents of this legislation would have you believe that it's an issue of fairness and that it wouldn't impact tax revenue negatively, and that it would be beneficial for consumers, pushing them towards more low ABV products. Fortunately, that is not accurate. My counterpart up here had already gone into the Maryland State Alcohol and Tobacco Commission and the report that they released. And to give you some additional numbers, what they found in that report is that when excise taxes on canned cocktails were reduced in Michigan, they lost out on $2.6 million in revenue. In Nebraska, after 18 months, $1.8 million in lost revenue. And again, neither state saw enough of an increase to offset the revenue loss, and it was not beneficial to consumers. This legislation would continue the 40-year push by the liquor industry to downplay the clear differences between the products of beer and liquor and put liquor on the same shelf as beer in areas where that is legal. More than 128 breweries across Maryland create directly 5,800 jobs and provide $839 million to the state's economy. Almost all canned cocktails are produced by mixing and packaging bulk spirits made or produced by giant liquor producers. Alternatively, beer is labor intensive, meaning that the beer industry in Maryland supports more jobs than the liquor industry on a per drink basis. These low ABV drinks are being used to recruit consumers to higher ABV, higher priced products. I encourage you to oppose this legislation. Large liquor companies do not need a tax reduction at the expense of Maryland's small businesses. Thank you again.
Thank you. Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm a little confused because our prior testimony was actually all local. Our local individuals, one right in my county, in the middle of my county, an amazing site, very supportive. So I'm confused by some of that. So if we're talking about products that have similar lower amounts, if we're purely talking about alcohol, why shouldn't they be taxed similarly? I'm confused.
From our perspective, these products are different. They are consumed differently. They are produced differently. They're
consumed differently.
If you have a liquor-based drink, oftentimes those drinks are consumed at a different rate than a beer or wine. Their beer is perishable. The cost, as Katie presented, the cost of producing a beer is significantly higher, the labor costs. And at the end of the day, Congress in its wisdom, post-prohibition, has always acknowledged the difference between beer, wine, and liquor-based products. Our biggest members, the Beer Institute's largest members, are companies like Anheuser-Busch and Molson Coors. They produce these products. They are the second largest producer of canned cocktails. They go into that business knowing full well that the tax rates are different, that the structural framework of the tax rates of canned cocktails, liquor-based drinks are different than those of beer. And that's the reason why that we continue to oppose this bill.
Wouldn't the tax rate what did you say, Bucko, still be quadruple from beer? Wouldn't the tax rate still be very high from the beer tax rate? Did I misread that?
No, I'm sorry, the legislation would lower it for canned cocktails. And my point is that our members also produce canned cocktails, and they go into that business recognizing the tax framework that's already been in place as it relates to the difference between beer, wine, and liquor. We're not advocating to change the tax rates. I think the other most important part here is that This is going to cost the state of Maryland significant money. The own report that was done by the state of Maryland acknowledges that in Michigan and Nebraska, the findings, there was no benefit to the consumer and there was no benefit to the state bottom line.
Right, I was just referring to the point where you were talking about how beer is still like labor intensive and all of the things that you talked about, but you'd still be at a 4 times higher tax rate than what the canned cocktails are.
Beer currently is at a lower tax rate than.
Right, I mean, so but these canned cocktails would still be at a 4 times higher tax rate
Correct.
than what beer is. Thank you.
Delegate Buckle.
More of a beer and wine person myself. I don't think, trying to think deeply. I don't think I've ever drank a canned cocktail. Not there's anything wrong with them, just not my particular taste profile, but I don't think that I've had one. Is there a difference from your perspective though about, someone goes and buys a 1.75 liter of Jack Daniel's, Jim Beam, Smirnoff, vodka, whatever it may be. Is there a difference in how we should evaluate that product versus the canned cocktail? I don't know enough about it, but from what I'm hearing from the canned cocktail folks, the alcohol level, the mechanism, the sale price for those units is very different and is more comparable to like I don't know if they still sell these either, but like a wine cooler or perhaps a beer. The actual what you're getting is more comparable than going out and buying a pint of whiskey or rum or whatever. In your industry's perspective, is there a difference between what we're taxing at $1.50 roughly per gallon, which is hard liquor, comes in a bottle generally, whatever, versus these canned cocktails?
I would encourage you to go out and get a canned cocktail. They are delicious. We are not denying that. One in particular that I would recommend you try is a new Jack Daniel's Jack and Coke canned cocktail, and pour that in a glass and compare it to a Jack and Coke that you get at a bar.
Okay.
Those products are probably going to taste identical, though they may have different ABVs based off of how heavy the pour is or something that's going on.
Okay.
There is no difference between the liquor that is in your canned cocktail and the liquor that is coming in that 750 milliliter. So we think that there should be continuance of what the taxes are on that.
So the liquor in the example you gave me, I mean, it's basically just a certain percentage of the Jack Daniels that you get out of the bottle at the bar or wherever, and it's pre-mixed with something that enables it to stay, that it doesn't spoil essentially, and it goes through the transportation process, and then you pop it open. And are you suggesting that it's similar to if I just went out and bought a handle of Jack Daniels and a 2 liter of Coke and mixed them myself?
I am saying that would really be on your own taste, but we do think that there is a lot of similarity between the taste of those two products, and it's going to be hard to distinguish.
Okay. Thank you for the information. I appreciate it.
If I may add, I think, really proud of the 2 small business owners and them creating a business, but to their own point, there's explosive growth in the canned cocktail industry. And so I would question why when they are seeing explosive growth and credit due to their hard work, why would we consider providing them with a tax break that costs the state more money?
Yeah, I mean, my interest, I guess, is just having some tax parity, fairness, kind of evaluating people all in the same way. And that's what I'm trying to get at. They're saying, hey, we're going to be viewed as wine. They don't, I'm not sure what the right comparison is. They have liquor in them, but they don't sound to me like you're out buying a bottle of Jack Daniels. It sounds like something different. It's not exactly wine. It's different than beer. And I think I'm just searching for where to compare it so that similarly situated businesses and products pay similar levels of taxation. That's my goal at least, but I appreciate the information. It's very helpful.
Any further questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 663, House Bill 800, Delegate Smith.
Hello, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, distinguished members of the committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Stephanie Smith, and I'm here to present House Bill 800. After that presentation, this will be a sobering conversation. Couldn't resist. So I came before you last year discussing the Maryland Voting Rights Act, and I'm bringing it back. And so I'll just give the high notes for those who may have remembered my testimony. This is very personal to me. We are in the midst of Black History Month, and a lot of the history that we are reminded of is about the fight, the persistent fight for voting rights in this country. My own grandmother paid poll taxes to vote in Virginia, and my grandfather voted for the very first time in his life at the age of 65 in 1968. And so these are things that I don't take for granted. And I definitely want to ensure that our state continues to strive to improve our record of access around the ballot. And so that is why I put in this bill. I want to, say that there was some streamlining of the bill from last year. And so that was reflecting some of the feedback we received. And so I don't want to belabor the point because I do know I'm at that late hour. It's kind of like a casino in here. You really can't tell what time of day it is, but I do know it's toward the end of the day. And so with that being said, I do hope that you will give, careful consideration to what is still a technical piece of legislation. And I deeply appreciate your patience as we examine them. And I'll have my panel, we'll have two panels summarize the pieces of this legislation. But at the heart of it is we want to ensure that no matter your race, your color, or your language ability, that you're able to access the ballot fairly and freely in the free state of Maryland. And so I thank you for your time, your consideration, and thoughtfulness. And that concludes my testimony on House Bill 800.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury. Chair Atterbury and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm Nancy Sorig, testifying on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Maryland, and I thank you for this opportunity. For many years, I've had the pleasure of coming before this committee to support legislation that you have enacted to help make Maryland's administration a model of best practices to make sure that voting in the state is accessible, fair, and efficient. However, there's one area that still has not been addressed that I'm going to highlight today that's in this bill, and then other people will talk about other sections of it. And that is the fact that there is no real oversight over redistricting by either the county or the municipal bodies. Currently, if an elected body adopts a redistricting map, the only recourse that someone who lives in one of those districts has, if they feel that they've been marginalized by the way the map was drawn, was to bring forth a lawsuit based on federal legislation. What this bill would do is if a jurisdiction has a history of drawing maps that have either been proved in court or can be verified through statistical calculation showing that based on the race of the residents in that district and based on who's been elected over time, that there is a good likelihood that marginalization has taken place. If a county or a municipality is deemed to have been potentially marginalizing their residences, they'd just be put under pre-clearance, which means after the next census, when they draw their maps, they would just have to run them by the Attorney General or the courts to make sure that they're not discriminatory. This would be a much more efficient and less costly process than taking a county or a municipality to court. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Gregory Brown from the ACLU of Maryland. And I just want to echo, what my colleague Nancy said. Many Maryland municipalities still use at-large elections, which can empower a white majority to capture most or all seats, even where there is a large Black, Indigenous, and person of color population. For example, 54% of the municipalities in Maryland have substantial BIPOC populations. Of these municipalities, 23% have all-white governments. Some municipalities are particularly egregious in that there are 18 municipalities with over 80% racial minority populations, and within 7 of them, racial minority representatives hold less than half of the seats in their municipal governments. Within municipalities with a substantial BIPOC population, 63% of them have an at-large system only. 10% an additional 10% have a mixed system, and only 27% have a district-based election system. As a snapshot, the town of Federalsburg faced an all-white government for 200 years. That finally changed in 2023 when 7 Black women from Federalsburg sued the town for diluting their right to vote through the town's at-large system. The federal lawsuit involved extensive and expensive expert analysis and testimony and a year's worth of advocacy until the court ordered a new election plan to be produced. That plan changed the at-large system into a district-based system. This bill would address municipalities in that same posture. The right to vote is a fundamental part of our democracy, and we believe that everyone's vote must count equally. But in too many Maryland counties, cities, and towns, the election systems in place dilute the votes of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The Maryland Voting Rights Act would give counties, cities, and towns the opportunity to make their elections fair and give BIPOC voters an equal vote. So we urge a favorable report. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chair. My bad. Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the committee. Again, Morgan Drayton with Common Cause Maryland. We are in enthusiastic support of HB 800, which is a landmark piece of legislation that will take the necessary steps to protect voting rights of all Marylanders at the state level, but especially those voters of color who have historically been denied the equal opportunity to participate in our democratic process. And the MDVRA will be a boon for the electoral participation of all historically excluded groups, and increased language access requirements are one of the ways that this legislation will seek to advance that mission. I want to briefly mention HB 563, which is our sister/standalone bill. It pulls a lot of the same provisions from the MDVRA around language access. It does go just a bit further in establishing resources at the polls for voters who might not speak English as a first language, but we are fully in support of both bills and however legislators decide to expand language access within our electoral system. So Section 203 of the Federal Voting Rights Act requires that counties provide election materials to specific language minority groups meeting the population threshold. So currently that's 10,000 citizens of voting age or 5% of the voting population. So as of right now, only Montgomery County and Prince George's County are required to translate voting materials to Spanish. HB 800 will ensure that non-English speakers across the state are not left out of the voting process by requiring localities with a language minority population of 2% or 4,000 citizens, voting age citizens, to provide all voting materials in additional languages. This will ensure that more voters are accurately informed, resulting in greater participation in an overall healthier democracy. It's our strong belief that no voter should ever be discouraged from voting because the materials were not provided in a language they can understand. HB 800 will make Maryland a national leader on protecting the right to vote, carrying forward momentum from across the nation, become one of the most comprehensive enacted state-level voting rights. For those reasons, we request a favorable report. Thank you. Just switch things. Maybe just.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Vice Chairman and committee members. My name is Willie G. Woods, President of the Caroline County branch of the NAACP. I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 800. This particular bill will codify and make clear some of the much needed protection and procedures of the Federal Voting Rights Act, and as well as expand some of the protections in ways that will facilitate challenges in these unlawful election systems. As we look at this, the NAACP, in collaboration with the ACLU of Maryland, the Caucus of African American Leaders, and the Black residents of Federalsburg, had hoped that we would be able to resolve our issues with Federalsburg in a way that would occur without a lawsuit, without some of the expenses that incurred, as well as without the time that we invested in bringing resolution to the issues. The existence of this particular bill into law at that time certainly would have made a difference, I think, in facilitating that process. As has already been commented on a little earlier, some of the issues that were presented. In Federalsburg in particular, the challenge was to the town's longstanding at-large election system, wherein no Black candidate had been elected in the town's 200-year history. And even today, with the current population roughly divided 50-50. Beginning in August, we began to contact the town, work very closely, presenting a detailed outlines of the town's issues, presenting maps, data, explanations, expressing our willingness to collaborate with the town, as well as knowing that in September the next year, there was a new election. That process began to move forward very smoothly initially, and then we ran into some problems as we moved into the January aspect, leading us to a need to file for a lawsuit. And it was as a result of the lawsuit that we were able to get the necessary changes made, and which also resulted in 2 Black candidates being elected for the first time in the town's history. This has made a significant adjustment and change in the spirit and outlook of the residents. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Delegate, for bringing this bill. And, you know, with the federal and national assault on the Voting Rights Act, we know that continued advocacy and pushes to ensure the right to vote is really critical. So I do appreciate this bill. I just had a couple questions for anyone on the panel who's able to answer regarding some of the provisions. I know the pieces around the drawing of legislative districts was mentioned. I just wanted to clarify in the bill, is this counties? Is this municipal? Is this our state districts, congressional districts? Can you just talk about the scope of what all would be included around that ability to create a path around preventing gerrymandering?
Sure. So this would be for the purpose of redistricting for counties and municipalities.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the local level, okay.
Yeah, just at the local level.
Okay, thank you. And also around the pre-clearance provisions, as I was reading through, and I'm still getting through it. I know it's a lengthy, but we'll get through the whole thing. I wanted to get a better sense with pre-clearance and jurisdictions that historically have had challenges and them having to get cleared by the Attorney General in order to move forward with some proposed changes that they might have. Are you all thinking of this bill in terms of, again, I wanted to understand, are we talking local, county, state, but also because with our election law policies, we're a state that here in this room, we lead and push the changes here at the state level. Usually counties and cities are a bit limited in scope in terms of what they are able to move forward. I just wanted to get a better sense of how that would work in terms of pre-clearance. Or am I thinking about it in the right way?
One of the major changes in this bill over the one that was submitted last year is when it comes to election administration, the counties are not subject to pre-clearance because, as you've mentioned, in Maryland, all of the counties in Baltimore City have to operate under the same laws and that are administered by SBE. So they are eliminated from the pre-clearance for election administration, but they are still subject to pre-clearance when it comes to drawing election districts, because that's not anything that SBE has any jurisdiction over.
Got it. So for the pre-clearance, you're really talking specifically about the drawing of the districts, not other election policies and proposals.
That's at the county level. At the municipal level, there could be pre-clearance depending on what the history of the municipality.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to add that our second panel will be discussing pre-clearance in depth, but yeah.
That's what I was gonna say.
Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Fascinating bill, and just had a few questions. The numbers can become tricky with some of the smaller municipalities in terms of percentages of residents. So I heard the number 4,000, 6,000. What's the threshold for the municipal to qualify for this bill, or is that?
That was language access piece.
That's language access. Okay, so we have municipalities, some in my county, that are 800 residents, 400 residents, 2,000 residents. So they're generally at large. All municipalities would be covered under this bill?
Well, are you specifically asking about language access or about?
About the ability to challenge and then expedite, I guess you're providing a expedited path to redistricting.
I think, we have more panelists. If you'd like to listen to them, or I'd be happy to take a stab at that. So there's,
So let me rephrase the question. So typically, if I want to challenge at-large districts, that's really what you're going after here. I would take it to the courts, and that might take years.
That's what you would do.
So you're providing with the bill passage an expedited way to move towards a councilmatic districts.
If your county has a history of having districts that were diluting the voices of certain population. If there's been no problem in your county and nobody's complained, you have good representation, then you wouldn't be subject to frequent.
Okay, so in a town that has 400 residents and meets the criteria for the history of disparity, they would still be included in this bill? Is there no cutoff threshold for the number of residents? I mean, some of these towns, we have 20 residents.
Yeah, the numbers that she was talking about had to do with language, providing materials of multiple range. The redistricting, it's not based on the number of.
You have to use the mic if you're gonna respond.
I said the redistricting, whether or not somebody would be under pre-clearance, is not based on the number of residents. It's based on the history of either being taken to court before or by using some accepted statistical matters to know that, to show that certain populations have been marginalized. That's all. If there's not a problem.
Okay, that's not my question.
Your question is,
So we
would
have-
all municipalities fall under it? Is there a certain number threshold? The answer is yes, all municipalities would fall under it if they have a history of discrimination in some sort.
So I'll give.
And if they have election districts, that's the other thing that,
So I'll give you a very pointed example. In my county, I have Elkton, has a high African-American population. However, we elect many African-Americans to the council, and it's plurality right now. But let's say it wasn't doing that, and they opted into this, and there's only, I don't know, 6,000, 8,000 residents, not that many. So would they then move in a direction of having councils, districts within the town, even though they're not that large of a municipality?
there are a number of remedies that could happen
Okay.
if there was a history of diluting the votes of your minority populations. It doesn't have to be that. I live in a town of 400 people. We're not going to have election districts. Everybody shows up to one place to go vote.
Okay.
So it's not a one size fit all solution.
Okay, and then my next question is, I heard something about the pre-clearance, maybe this for the next panel, but why wouldn't we apply this to our delegate districts? Because they experience the same sort of complaints that are received that prompted this bill.
Are you gonna put that bill in with me?
Yeah,
I would
the
love
league
to.
actually
Is that
works very hard
invitation?
to have a different way the election districts be.
I think we also realize that at the local and municipal level, sometimes there's less levers for change.
Sure.
You get, for example, the example that was given from Federalsburg. My family's from Federalsburg, and my family that's lived there a long time, they couldn't imagine a day where they would have anyone that looked like them represent them, even though there's a sizable number. So I think that for many folks at the local level, the levers for assistance don't seem as accessible, and that's why they're coming to the state for redress, whereas we have a lot more opportunities to grapple with these issues at this level.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to partner with you on that bill.
Okay, thank you. Look, partnerships happening here. You want to ask this question, this panel, or there's another panel? You
Another
go ahead.
panel.
Okay, go ahead. Then we're going to move on to the next panel.
There is good.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be quick. This question is for the ACLU. A couple years ago, y'all brought a case against Baltimore County, racial gerrymandering. Under this bill, would you have been able to bring a state case as well?
I wasn't there at the time, but my colleague Nick Steiner was. He would be able to answer that question.
Okay, I'll wait. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all very much. Next, Lucas Rodriguez, Adam Lyons, Lada Knott, Nick Steiner.
Good. You hear me okay? Yeah. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Nick Steiner. I'm an attorney with the ACLU of Maryland and will be testifying generally about why Maryland needs the Maryland Voting Rights Act. Because Maryland is a progressive state and has many progressive voting rights laws already, having a state voting rights act might seem overkill, but unfortunately we do need one. Over the last few years, the ACLU has brought several federal voting rights lawsuits, but even figuring out whether a federal case can be brought requires tons of money and time, including hiring expert demographers, political scientists, and historians. Then actually litigating the case takes time and significant resources as well. Recently, the ACLU's filed 3 VRA cases in Baltimore County. We had a lawsuit challenging the racially discriminatory redistricting plan that the county adopted at the end of 2021. The county packed a supermajority of Black voters into a single district, diluting their vote when a second district could have been created. The federal judge in that case found that it was racially discriminatory and diluted the Black vote and that the plan had to be redone. In Federalsburg, as you heard before from the previous panel, similar vote dilution persisted for 200 years. The at-large system there completely shut out Black candidates who ran for town council. And no Black person or any person of color has been able to win a seat in that town's history. Because the town was sued for it, there's now a two-member district system, and the September 23 elections resulted in 2 Black women taking the seats at the table and creating history. Most recently in Wycomico County, the town's mixed at-large and district system has created an election structure where the Black community only gets literally 1 seat at the table. The Black community is packed into a single district despite the possibility of creating a second district. Hopefully that case will resolve soon, but still ongoing. And as mentioned before, in Maryland, there's 84 municipalities that have greater than 20% BIPOC population. 61 of them have at-large systems like Federalsburg and Wycomico. Under the MDVRA, these things can be addressed and creative solutions can be done. And for those reasons, we urge a favorable report on HB 800.
Thank you.
Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins. My name is Adam Liaz, and I'm Senior Policy Counsel at the Legal Defense Fund, or LDF. I'm thrilled to testify here today in support of the Maryland Voting Rights Act, and I want to thank Delegate Smith for introducing this visionary legislation. Since LDF was founded by Maryland native Thurgood Marshall, we have worked to empower Black voters. And after the Supreme Court has undercut the Federal Voting Rights Act, LDF has advocated for state-level voting rights acts as a critical measure to protect Black voters. Maryland is a top priority for this work because of significant Black population, demonstrated local need, and promising leadership. Right now, Maryland has the opportunity to become a national leader on voting rights by meeting a critical local need. And LDF supports the entire bill, but I'll focus specifically on HB 800's pre-clearance provisions. And this program was modeled after Section 5 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which was perhaps the single most effective civil rights law in history to eradicate discrimination in voting. It contains a framework to determine which local governments come under the pre-clearance protection based upon a recent history of race-based discrimination in voting or in other arenas such as the criminal legal system. It then provides a streamlined, time-limited administrative procedure for these jurisdictions to get an expert review of key voting changes by the Attorney General before they go into effect to ensure that they will not discriminate. Counties or towns can always go to a court instead or to appeal. And any jurisdiction in the state can take advantage of the AG's expert counsel to avoid inadvertent discrimination. Pre-clearance is based on the simple principle that when it comes to a matter as fundamental as the right to vote, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And by avoiding costly litigation, the program saves taxpayer money and time, as we heard earlier. It's also tailored to fit Maryland's existing legal framework, as we heard, because it only applies to redistricting and similar changes at the county level, but more broadly, robustly at the municipal level. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about the program. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the committee. My name is Lucas Rodriguez. I'm a student attorney at the Election Law Clinic at Harvard Law School. I'm here to testify in support of HB 800's vote dilution provisions at the request of Common Cause Maryland. And these provisions get at some of the at-large election issues that we heard about earlier. I want to highlight 4 ways these provisions improve on the Federal Voting Rights Act to create clearer, less burdensome, and more efficient ways to vindicate voting rights. So first, Section 202B requires plaintiffs bringing a vote dilution claim to provide a benchmark to assess dilution against. And this is something that in federal courts, parties and courts have struggled to reach agreement on. What is the right baseline to determine whether and to what extent vote dilution exists? The Maryland VRA anticipates and answers that question, forcing plaintiffs to provide an undiluted benchmark and thus giving the parties a comparator that they can all agree to from the start to use in the litigation. Second, sections 202B2 and 202C eliminate a requirement that communities of color be residentially segregated in order to receive protections against vote dilution. To obtain relief in federal cases, plaintiffs have to show that their community is sufficiently numerous and geographically compact to make up a majority in a single member district. That means that communities that experience vote dilution, but that are residentially not segregated, cannot obtain relief. The Maryland VRA joins other state VRAs in eliminating this burdensome requirement, ensuring all communities that experience vote dilution can remedy those harms. Third, Section 204A confirms that a vote dilution claim is available to private parties. Just a couple months ago, a federal court of appeals held that private parties cannot bring claims under the Federal Voting Rights Act. If that precedent holds at the U.S. Supreme Court level, or if other court of appeals follow suit, the Maryland VRA will be the only way private parties in Maryland can access meaningful political participation. Fourth and finally, Section 205 requires plaintiffs to send local governments a pre-lawsuit notification letter, notifying them of a potential VRA violation and specifying a remedy that could fix that violation. This provision can facilitate discussion between the parties of settlement options, ideally avoiding costly, time-consuming litigation altogether. That's just a small sample of the ways the Maryland VRA makes it easier for everyone to access a meaningful political ballot. So thank you, and I look forward to any questions.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury and members of the committee. My name is Letha Knott, and I am a senior legal counsel at the Campaign Legal Center, which is a nonpartisan organization that defends and promotes voting rights and successfully settled the first case that was brought under the Washington Voting Rights Act. I'm testifying today in support of HB 800, a bill that would benefit local governments and voters alike by making it less costly and less burdensome to enforce voting rights for communities of color. The provisions of the MDVRA improve upon the Federal Voting Rights Act, and that's because they're based on lessons learned from decades of lawsuits under the Federal VRA. As my co-panelist mentioned, the MDVRA contains provisions that encourage voters and local governments to work together to remedy potential violations before resorting to expensive litigation. And the bill also provides for cost reimbursement for the pre-lawsuit notice letters that plaintiffs have to send, since they often require community members to hire experts to perform expensive statistical analysis. And these expenses shouldn't discourage people from enforcing their own civil rights. The bill also streamlines the process for determining whether a community of color has had its voting power diluted. It clarifies which communities are eligible to bring these claims. It establishes the different types of proof that they can provide. And it sets out practical guidelines for courts to assess whether the community has been denied an equal opportunity to participate in the political process. This bill would consistently make it easier for courts to interpret state and local election laws. It specifies that whenever possible, courts should interpret Maryland state and local election laws in favor of protecting the right to vote, which is in line with the Maryland Constitution and the Maryland Declaration of Rights, which recognize that the right to vote is preservative of all other rights. It also would empower state courts to consider a wider range of locally tailored remedies to better serve communities of color and choose the one that's best suited to help the impacted community, correcting an egregious flaw in the federal VRA that has led courts to give deference to the remedy proposed by the government that violated the community's voting rights in the first place. We urge you to support HB 800, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Questions, Delegate Young?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Smith. I didn't thank you the first time. Apologize. My question is to the ACLU. Nick, good to see you. Same question. And it's really 2 questions. The second one was going to be, first one is, would you have been able to bring the Baltimore County lawsuit? And then secondly, would you thus be, assuming the answer is yes, would you thus be in the position of being able to pick venue?
Yes. The first answer to your 2 questions. First is yes. We would be able to bring it under the MDVRA. And before getting to your second question, I wanted to add that I think the pre-clearance provisions would actually be really helpful or would have been really helpful rather, in the Baltimore County example, because they could have gone to the Attorney General, submitted the redistricting plan that they were sued for. And the Attorney General could have said, look, you can actually create another majority Black district here, do that, or you'll get sued. But yes, under the MDVRA, the ACLU of Maryland could have brought a case. And if you could repeat the second question.
The second question was venue. It was a matter of
Venue.
venue.
Yeah, so the venue in the MDVRA is placed with Anne Arundel County Circuit Court, which is where all of the election related lawsuits go. So they're already steeped in expertise. The judges are steeped in expertise around election law generally. So it just kind of makes sense for the cases to go to Anne Arundel County. Yeah.
Delegate Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, my friend Delegate Smith, for bringing this bill. Just some questions, and you cited a couple of examples of where there's been some discrimination taking place, and the courts seem to be sorting that out. I guess my first question is, how rampant a problem is this? How many municipalities do you feel are practicing in discrimination?
I can answer. So it's interesting and difficult to answer that question, because part of the reason why we can't just bring cases anywhere and everywhere is that in order to figure out whether a federal VRA violation has occurred in the first place, we need to hire experts to do data analysis and look at voting patterns. We need political scientists, we need a demographer who can draw districts to see whether the Black population or the BIPOC population is compact enough to even create a district. So it's hard to answer that question. There have been a couple places that we have looked. In Harford County, the BIPOC population is around 26%, but is dispersed in the county. So it's not actually possible under the federal VRA to address that, because we can't create a district where where we couldn't create a district to remedy that problem. And districts are the general way courts under the federal VRA will resolve Voting Rights Act violations.
And the reason I asked that question is because there is a physical impact, and it says a small business impact is potentially meaningful with that. And the reason I ask is, obviously, I am firmly opposed to any discrimination of any kind, period. But a bill like this, you know, the rain falls and the just and the unjust alike with some of these penalties, especially some of the smaller municipalities, like Port Tobacco has 12 people in the town, and they would also have to abide by this, and it would be crippling to them. So that's my question is, like, you know, the courts seem to be doing their job and fixing some of these issues. And I understand the point that, you know, why should people be discriminated? Why must they pay to bring a lawsuit, right? And I certainly support that. My concern is there's a lot of good actors out there, many, many good actors that will be not intended to be, but will be punished as a result of this bill. The consequences will at least be negative to those good actors. And I guess that's my concern with this.
You can start.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. And I think there's two ends of that. So with respect to the need, you know, I would refer you to the ACLU, who's done some great research that shows that this is actually a problem that is spread across the state, and we can get that to your office. You know, the statistics that were referred to earlier about a third of counties with substantial BIPOC populations have all white government, about a quarter of municipalities. So we know that there's a problem in different pockets of the state. With respect to your second point, which is an important one, we've done a lot of things in this legislation to ensure that good actors are not burdened, right? So for example, the gentleman earlier asked about thresholds, right? So if you have a very small community where you only have a few folks on your council, and there's no prospect of a district being created where people of color can win a majority at all across the district, there is no claim under this bill, right? There is no vote dilution that's happening. There's no claim to be brought. You're not vulnerable to a lawsuit. In addition, for the pre-clearance program, which you mentioned, Going through that program has been shown at the federal level for decades to be not very burdensome at all. The average cost of submission is not high. The bill actually provides for a fund that would assist municipalities and counties with that cost if they need it. But also importantly, there are some thresholds to take into account. So if you have a very small community, you can get into the pre-clearance program for a few different ways. If you have a prior voting or civil rights violation, there is no population threshold. So if your very small community has in fact engaged in discrimination before, you can be put into pre-clearance. But the other prongs that deal with arrest rates or voter registration disparities, they actually do have population thresholds for the protected class. So if you have fewer than 6,000 people who are Black or Latino or Asian or members of protected class in your community, you cannot be brought into pre-clearance because of those particular prongs. So throughout the piece of legislation, we've really tried to make sure that this is well targeted and does not have an unintended impact on communities that are doing the right thing. And finally, I would say that sometimes the discrimination that occurs is not intentional, right? It's a legacy of how things were set up in prior errors. And so the intent of this bill is to give an expert set of eyes to jurisdictions that don't want to discriminate, but maybe their patterns and practices have resulted in a disparate impact on voters of color. And that's why we've made the provisions available to any jurisdiction who can go to the Attorney General and say, hey, could you check out our laws and make sure they're not discriminatory, and get that expert set of eyes on their policies.
If I could add a couple more things. One thing is that the provision that requires anybody who feels a violation has taken place to notify their local government and gives the local government time to meet with them and fix the problem. And there's a safe harbor where they can't be sued while they are discussing ways to fix the problem. I think that is in reference to the good actors that you referred to who proactively want to fix problems of unequal access to the ballot. Like, it gives them the chance to do that without litigation. And the other thing I'd say is that the power that this gives courts to tailor remedies to specific localities. I think if you're talking about a district that's incredibly small, and it would not make sense to turn that into a jurisdiction that's very small, and it wouldn't make sense to create a bunch of districts within it, then that wouldn't be the solution. That wouldn't be the remedy for that problem.
But that's just one part of the bill. I'm talking about the overarching bill. I mean, that's a piece of the bill, but there are other elements of the bill that do have an impact on municipalities. And, you know, the bill unfortunately dictates, from my interpretation of the bill, it's one size fits all. And so that's just my overall, there's no way to respond to that, but that's just my overall concern. So thank you.
Okay, Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Smith, for bringing this important bill and sharing your family's story. Much appreciated. So I think, as you know, my district is pretty much made up of 2 large municipalities. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. It is a long bill. I've been trying to look through it. So would a municipality need to do anything proactively at this point, or would it solely be, would changes, say districts or anything else, come solely at the time that a complaint or a court was weighing in?
So I can answer yes. So there's nothing proactive for the municipality to do, except if they were to qualify as part of the language access program. So they may not be existingly covered under the Federal Voting Rights Act. And if the I think it's the State Board of Election does the calculations, determines, then they would have to start providing ballot materials and other voting materials in different languages. Other than that, they might also find after the Attorney General makes determinations on which municipalities and counties are part of the pre-clearance program, they might find themselves part of that program. And then, like you say, there's nothing to be done until they change a provision. So if they want to change any of their laws, they would then send them in, but they don't have to take any proactive action. And the rest of the parts of the bill are just sort of passive causes of action, where if there's discrimination happening, someone can bring a course of action, or more accurately, send a letter to say, let's start negotiating over this. But before that, no action is required by the communities.
Thanks for that.
Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question regarding process. In my county, Southern Maryland, St. Mary's County, there was a proposal last year to have a subdivision district where there would be a minority vote or minority participation. We brought it forward here. It unfortunately did not move. However, with this bill, and I want to thank you, Delegate Smith, for bringing this forward, because it seems as though there will be some movement or some policies in place that will help this community. In terms of local government, they proudly offer that they would not change anything, but they were very pleased to not have any diversity. I won't say pleased, but they saw no problem not having diversity within their local as well as their state representation. So I'm hopeful that this bill will address that to some degree.
Yeah, I think there's two paths that the bill could potentially address that problem. Immediately after the bill is passed, organizations like the ACLU and voters that live in your district could do an analysis to determine if under the law's provisions, there is what's called vote dilution. So if folks are not having a fair opportunity for representation, then they could they could send a letter essentially. And then that negotiation process would hopefully go differently because it would be backed up by a strong legal provision, right? So they would hopefully work things out through negotiation, but if not, bring a lawsuit that says that you have what's known as a vote dilution problem. You're drowning out the voices of Black and brown voters in your community, and now we have a cause of action. If your community also had a history of discrimination, they could come under the pre-clearance provision, in which case next time around in 2030, when there's new redistricting that happens, if there's going to be a change made in your community, then that would have to be approved by the Attorney General, which would be another opportunity for an expert to say, wait a second, we don't think this plan is fair. And so it would give another window of opportunity for members of the community to have a comment period to discuss that and have a fair outcome. And I should also say that when there are changes to districting, even under the first process, there is a common ability for the public to get engaged as well. So,
thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. There was one individual. Is anyone here from MML? They were signed up to testify unfavorably, but I do not see them here. So that concludes the hearing on House Bill 800, and that concludes the Ways and Means bill hearings for today. Subcommittee chairs, we are gonna go back here and make this quick, hopefully. Backroom folks, do any subcommittee chairs have any announcements to make? No. Buckle, do you have an announcement?
I would like to say that today Delegate Eric Eversole proposed a tax cut, and for that, we should all appreciate and value.
Okay, we are gonna go off the live feed.
I'm happy
Thank
to say
you.
that. I was very impressed. Very impressed.